I heard that it was only legal for one person to come.
I think we just have to have a quorum, but we
Here we
can.
go, guys.
Because Amanda was thinking if he wasn't gonna be here, we could look at Mike.
All right, I'm gonna call this work session to order for the Bedford County Board of Supervisors, March 23rd, 2020. And I'm gonna hand it over to Robert Hiss and Finance Director Ashley Anderson.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And we're going to run through a couple different items for the budget work session this evening. We're going to go in order just so you can kind of keep track of on the agenda. What we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to talk a couple items that emerged out of the Personnel Committee. We'll talk about health insurance, where we are with that, and what some of the rationale behind where we're going with health insurance. Cover a little bit of the new position requests and briefly talk about that. We're going to cover then the third item. We'll talk about the capital improvement program for FY21 through FY25 and some changes that staff has proposed so far in the capital improvement program. And then we'll finish up with a final, just kind of a big picture where we are as of today and some of the other decisions that we may want to make. And if you guys have any questions and comments, just from a big picture perspective, we'll cover that last. But we'll, to start with, I wanted to turn it over to Dawn, our HR director, and let her cover the health insurance and where we are as of right now.
Good evening. So in your packet, there are health insurance renewal information, which I'm going to be working off of. And you will see on pages 4 and 5 is actually where I'm going to get started. Our initial renewal was an 18.6% increase, and we had Willis go back to Anthem and renegotiate that. Their second offer was 13.3%, which is reflected on page 4 of your material. It's in purple.
I'm not with you on this.
It's in this one, under the changes to the agenda.
Oh, okay.
Looks like this.
I got it. Okay.
So on this page, it displays the plans that we have now. We have 4 plans. We have 2 Anthem HealthKeeper plans and 2 Anthem Key Care plans. And the reason we have Key Care plans is when we first enrolled with Anthem, we had only HealthKeepers, and we had a lot of employees come back and ask us to put the Key Care plans back in place. The difference between the HealthKeeper plans and the Key Care plans are the network themselves. Key Care has more doctors in the network, and that's helpful for people that have to go outside of the state of Virginia, for Johns Hopkins or Duke or somewhere like that. The Key Care, the HealthKeeper plans are primarily just Virginia networks. So we added those back in because of the feedback we received from the employees. So if we left everything, or this was the proposal that Anthem came back with. And obviously we knew that 13.3% was not going to be doable in this year's budget. So we had Willis come and talk to us a couple of weeks ago. If you'll flip over to page 5, please. We decided that we needed to make some changes to the plan to drive that cost down. And the changes to the plan is highlighted in yellow. So for that first plan, the Key Care 1500 Zero plan, we changed the deductible from $1,500 to $2,500, and the out-of-pocket cost from $1,000 up to $2,500. Sorry, these numbers are kind of small and it's dark in here. Plan 2, same thing. We went from a $1,500 out-of-pocket, or a $1,500 deductible up to a $2,000 deductible, and increased the out-of-pocket to $3,500. Plans 2 and 3 are almost identical, except one is a HealthKeeper and one is a Key Care, as far as coverage goes. And And then the fourth plan is a Key Care HSA plan. That plan is the plan that we really want to drive employees into because it is the lowest, it's not the lowest cost for the county because we offer that supplemental healthcare savings account. However, it's lower as far as claims, what the Anthem actually pays out because the employee is paying more out of their pocket for the deductible. You'll notice the deductible in that one is a $2,700 plan. It was Willis's recommendation not to change that plan at all because it's the least coming out of the employee's paycheck. And we're hoping to, with education, migrate people into that plan, which would reduce our cost. So if we take all of those things into consideration and we migrate, as we said, we could potentially drive the cost of the insurance down to 7.9%. Now, of course, that's all depending on where employees actually enroll in the plans, but with our education and our promotion of this, we feel like we can get really close to that. The other thing that we want to do this year is that very top plan is our richest plan. And that plan is in place. It's been in place as long as I've been here, and I'm going on my 6th year. That plan is considered a very rich plan. And most companies, agencies, they don't even offer those kind of rich plans anymore. And we currently have we have 150 people in that plan, but what we want to do is, again, educate people into some of these lower plans and tell them this year that this plan is being frozen. And what that means is if you're in that plan now, you can stay in it one more year, but next year we are going to do away with that plan altogether and then drive them into one of these other lower plans that will also help our cost of this coverage.
You talk about the rich plan being Plan 1?
Yes, sir. It's the $1,500 zero deductible. And we, throughout the years, when I first came, we probably had about 17 people in that HSA account. And we're just doing better and better education on that. And you can see now we currently have 87 people in that plan. So.
Can I share something, Mr. Chairman, real quick?
Yes.
I had back surgery. The surgery cost $32,900. And the policy that I have, it's not insurance, but it paid 100%. And also paid 100% of all the evaluation, including, you know, Dr. Elegella wanted to give me injections to determine exactly where it was in my spine and what was bothering me and why. And so my wife had her hip replaced a year ago in March, and it was whatever hip replacement is, was done in Lynchburg. They paid 100% of it prior to the surgery. In my company, I refused to pay $24,000 a year with a $6,000 out of pocket for my wife and myself. And so we pay $500 a month for the two of us, plus every quarter we pay $100 extra. And we were covered 100%. The only thing is when we go to the doctor, we tell the doctor we don't have insurance. It's called a Christian Healthcare Ministries. So we have, you know, zero deductible. I have a Kroger drug card. I take Celebrex. 90-day supply cost me $12. Where if I didn't have that and no insurance, it would cost me close to $300. Anyway, I don't know if that's something that the county would entertain, because when you look at what your employees are paying close to $600 a month out of their pockets for this policy.
No,
Okay.
no, sir. For this policy, if it's a single employee, they're paying $121.
Oh, okay.
Okay. For an employee plus spouse, it's $500 for employee plus spouse.
Okay.
Is that employee plus spouse and children?
No, sir, that's just employee plus spouse.
And that's per month.
Per month, yes, sir.
So the county's picking up.
On the employee plus spouse?
Yeah.
The county is paying $927.
And just on a single employee?
Single employee, $522,
Okay.
which is on page 7.
Okay.
Where that's outlined.
Thank you.
I think one, like, if I can interject something, I think one theme with this is that, so we've worked with our consultants and Anthem in order to reduce the cost from where the first renewal came in, and we've made, I think, really good progress. I think we're at a good spot right now. So this proposal is, employees are really going to get hit twice. I mean, they're going to get hit with a plan and the change design, the plan design. So they're going to have higher deductibles, and they're going to have higher maximum out of pockets, and they're going to be asked to contribute more towards the plan. So, for instance, like the health keepers are going to get a 15% increase. The Key Care 1500 plan, they're going to get a 20% increase, and the health keepers 1500 deductible plan with a 20% copay, they're going to get a increase of 10% on their monthly contributions. So, anyways, in addition to whatever, we're not planning for any pay adjustments or anything. The employees will certainly be taking home less money out of their paycheck with this proposal, but that's just kind of where we are right now.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Edgar said he's 15 minutes out, but he's coming.
So that's really where we are. And again, kind of like what Don alluded to is when you're making, the way I kind of approached this was, you don't always want to make health insurance changes just for this single year. I mean, you can manipulate the plans and plan design and payer mixes to meet a budget. But at the same time, when we're doing this, we need to be thinking 1 and 2 and 3 years down the road. How do we want to position our health plan in order to maintain and control costs and still offer something that's attractive for our employees? So you don't want to make rash decisions, but you want to have a strategy. So as Don alluded to, our strategy is to close out these higher cost plans that really they're a great benefit. Don't get me wrong. We've had hundreds and hundreds of employees benefit off of those for years and years and years. And I'm glad that our employees have been able to do that and their families. But really going forward is just not sustainable. So starting to dial back some of these higher or richer plans going forward is, yes, it may not be as employee friendly as we have been in the past, but it's just more sustainable for a budget perspective, and making the health savings account high deductible plans more of our core plan that we're trying to work towards is where we're going. So this is just a kind of a pragmatic manner in order to make those moves in that direction.
May I ask a question? In the event that an employee is eligible, but maybe they choose to go a different route, maybe something such as Bob suggested, does that just mean the county, there is no benefit at all, they just don't get anything, or is there, because it's clearly going to save the county money if they're not choosing.
Yes, sir. I don't carry the county insurance. I'm on my spouse's insurance, so.
Do you get anything?
I don't get anything.
Well, let me say, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, I'm just curious, because if it's saving the county money, is there, if somebody has an option to maybe do something that's less expensive.
Well, we do encourage the employees, of course, to, compare their spouse's plans, and if that's a better deal, certainly to go that route. We have employees who, one has the insurance here, one has the insurance there, and one carries one child, and one carries another child. This kind of split those costs up. We have all different kind of configurations, so.
Okay.
How do our plans compare with our neighboring jurisdictions?
I haven't compared it to, I think we have really good insurance, and we have lots of people tell us that. I don't remember what Brian told us.
I don't remember.
It was like 27%. Our renewal was high, but it's not as high as some I've been hearing this year. And I'd explained this in the personnel committee, but, you know, our costs are driven by claims. And we currently have 10, what they consider high-cost claims on our account. And some of those may go away, but they may be replaced by others. So, you know, that's something we can't control. And thank goodness we do have good insurance for those folks that have to use that.
So this is the recommendation from staff?
This is the recommendation, sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd also like to just point out briefly, of course, this doesn't cost the county anything because it's 100% paid by the employee. But we do have a 2-year renewal with a rate guarantee with the dental plan at no change in premium. And our vision insurance is actually going down 20%. And that's a 4-year rate guarantee. So that's good news.
I guess the final thing I'll say about health insurance, and really we're so late in the game, it's hard to do this year, but we did have a very good conversation with our consultants and by default with Blue Cross Blue Shield about in the future looking at us going to a self-funded model. This may have not been the best year to do that because of what Don just said, our 10 high-cost claims, and quite frankly, when Anthem ran the numbers, it wasn't going to make a difference really this year necessarily with self-funded just because of those high-cost claims. But that is something we may really want to consider in the future. There are different fees and some taxes and so forth, and that some other overhead, I'll put it that way, that Anthem charges us that we would be able to avoid if we go self-funded. Of course, self-funded has a lot more risk. And you know, we have to have a good reserve fund in order to pay for claims in bad years. But it's something that I would like to have us explore a little bit more in greater detail, potentially for next year. It's just a little bit too late. And really, in this, in our claim, like I said, in our claims this year, just didn't make a whole lot of economic sense. We didn't see any benefit this year per se.
Mr. Chairman, what
Yes.
historically, say, maybe the last 10 years, do we have a track of how many high claims we have per year? What's the average? I mean, you're saying 10's a lot. What do we usually have, like 3?
I think last year we had 7, and I don't know before that. That's something they could look up for us if you wanted to know.
Well, I just kind of know how, if it's trending, if it was 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 10.
Mr. Chairman, one final note.
Sure.
In my case, since it's not permitted to have a group policy such as what my wife and I have, but you've heard what it costs the 2 of us, $500 a month, and the benefit from it, 0 deductible, we do have to be our advocates. If we're going to explore self-funded, perhaps this might be something to look at for next year. I never realized it would be, too far going to try it this year, but I couldn't be happier. And I mean, if you weigh the cost of paying the county employees insurance and the out-of-pocket expense for them versus maybe paying a little bit extra to help them cover the cost, it could be something that, that's why I found it so palatable, and it was unbelievable when we used it.
If I had to say one final thing, just as a claims containment strategy is, so we have a few wellness programs that we had an employee health fair, and we do a couple other things, but when we were meeting with Anthem in January, I kind of took them to task saying that I've never worked in a jurisdiction that the health insurer did not provide some sort of wellness grant to the employer. So I said, that would mean a lot to me going forward if you want to remain our health insurer, if you would provide some funds in order for us to do something with a wellness program. So they agreed, separate from all of this, they've agreed to give us a $10,000 grant in order to help with a wellness, try to get a wellness program established and some parameters that we can, encourage that with our employees. So again, we already do that in a very passive, and some active and some passive ways, but with those funds, we can ramp that up and have some more targeted strategies and do a better job with that, I think. So that'll be good going forward.
All right, anything else?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, and I'll let Dawn help me a little bit more with this, but I'll kind of take the lead. The other thing that the Personnel Committee, and we talked about a number of things, but at least for budget purposes, the other item I wanted to talk about tonight was new position requests. So this has been evolving as the budget has been evolving, and the whole economic situation of the county has also been evolving. And I think it's in your packet here is what we sent out as to what the recommendations were, at least for thoughts. And some of those has probably even changed from last week. So for the bulk of the new position requests, the recommendations are no. I mean, we just can't really afford those this year. Not to say that they're not worthy, not to say that they're wouldn't add value to the different departments that have requested those, and they probably could do some enhanced services and provide even, greater targeted delivery of those services to our citizens. But considering the community's economic situation, our budget challenges that we're working through that we've covered in past work sessions, for the most part, the recommendations are for no new employees. The only ones that we still are somewhat considering, I would say, are in the fire and rescue area. There is a request, there's two requests. One was for 3 additional medical ALS positions, and after the Finance Committee reviewed this, and staff has reviewed this too, there's a lot of great reasons to have this, we would like to have a little bit more information to understand if all the positions are filled, how this would reduce overtime expenses, and how it would impact keeping trucks in service. We do have some challenges with, we're at a very minimal staffing point right now, so adding some additional would be helpful. But again, we just didn't feel comfortable that there's enough data as of today to support that. Not with a recurring, an equal reduction in overtime or keeping trucks in service. There was some analysis done on that, but it needs to have some more work. But the one from Fire and Rescue that we were interested in was the training officer. This has been a position that has certainly been identified and requested by the staff, but also has been identified by several of the volunteer agencies as something that would be very helpful for them as well. So our task, and I've talked to Fire and Rescue with this, and we're still working through this on our end, but the Personnel Committee thought as well that this would be a position worthwhile considering if we could pay for that within budget reductions or existing funds within the Fire and Rescue budget. So we wouldn't be adding dollar values over and above what we're already spending. This would be something that would have to fit within the budget.
You do it if you do it in the budget you already have.
That's what we were recommending for consideration. Now, at the end of the day, we may still need those monies to balance our budget and finish up our budget work, but that is at least the direction we were heading as of last week. But that's subject to change. Same thing if you go down this sheet to the Sheriff's Department. The Sheriff's Department requested 2 field deputies, and this would help fill out another shift that they would be able to work on. Similar type of conversation was that if some permanent budget cuts could be realized in order to offset these expenses, I think the Personnel Committee was more favorable towards that same kind of situation. And I think there's a nuance here between just some budget fitting within some existing budget, your budget parameters, but also versus making permanent budget reductions. So there's different seasonal and economic things that sway within budgets, whether it's fuel or a certain amount of retirements that might take place. But still, we're funding these positions at whatever their costs are. So the challenge that the Personnel Committee put forward, and I've relayed on to the Sheriff's Office, was if there was what I would call permanent budget reductions, then this would be more more appetizing for the board to consider. And I've corresponded with the sheriff. He and I have talked a little bit, and they're still considering that.
Mr. Hess, so what you're saying for the sheriff, it's $69,000 is what they're asking for. And you're saying if they can find permanent $69,000 budget cuts for this year to absorb that, what happens next year if they've still got that $69,000 permanent? That becomes a reduction in expenses for the county, right? Moving forward, or?
Yeah, that's my thing.
It would just change. I mean, the budget would remain the same. It's just to be shifted from one cost
Would
right
they have,
now.
would they
to-
have an additional $69,000 in 2 years now? If they're not.
If it wasn't permanent, it would be. I mean, if things changed or if they asked for more money on certain line items, then yes, it could be. But Mr. Sharp was going in the right direction. It'd be that $69,000 worth of expenses would be discontinued in certain
Right, it's not
line
there.
items. And no, I mean, we would have to monitor that if we saw that they came back. I mean, that'd be a problem. And that's why it can't be something that's reoccurring.
So like fuel, for example, that might be a temporary reduction due to the economy. Well, we don't consider that a permanent reduction because as soon as gas prices go up, that's gonna go back up. So we would be looking for reductions in expenditures other than things like fuel or electric that have a tendency to cycle with the economy.
So that request is out there, and we're still working through those nuances. Again, at the end of the day, we may not be able to utilize those funds. We may just need to utilize those savings in order to balance the budget. But that would be something that, again, the Personnel Committee felt somewhat favorable towards if the sheriff can figure out how to make that work. This is the next area I want to touch on a little bit is with the voter registration office or registrar's office. So this is kind of a twofold issue. Really, this is all about an unfunded mandate from the state to have 45 days of early voting. So so there's been, the original budget proposal was to look at the number of voters who could potentially vote early, and based on trying to cycle those individuals through the voting precincts, how best to deliver that early 45-day early voting. And the original recommendation from the Board of Elections and the Registrar's Office was to establish 3 different early voting stations. And those would be open during normal business hours for up to 45 days before the actual election. So that is fairly expensive because you have to add on all these part-time hourly employees to do that. So what the Personnel Committee was looking at was really 2 different options for us to really consider. And we don't have to decide tonight, but this is where we kind of need to look at, was either number 1, consider the registrar's office itself the early voting site, which still has a cost, and it's in here of a little bit over $18,000, because the existing staff that works in that office, they can't cycle people through early voting and run an election countywide at the same time. You just can't physically do that. And you have to have some separation of duties to make that work. So you still have to hire some people part-time in order to do that. Or the other thing that we were looking at was potentially 1 satellite, if you want to call it that, voting station, and that would cost roughly $60,000 in order to staff a station, a satellite location. So those were the 2 areas we were looking at. There's pros and cons with each. Certainly one of the biggest problems with using the registrar's office as the actual early voting site is, first of all, space constraints. You've been in the registrar's office, it's kind of small. Second of all, just the logistics of where people park, the impacts on the actual library services, where would you stack the lines of people that have to get in and out. It'll really create some challenges, and I think you'd find that voters could get fairly disenchanted with that whole process, the way it looks. So depending on what we can afford to do, if we did 1 voting location, we can find a better suitable office space and parking situations and that type of stuff.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
let me ask you a question.
Sure.
How can you know there's going to be such a huge influx or crowd of people voting 45 days prior to this election? it's like opening a brand-new business and anticipating that you're gonna be flooded from the get-go.
As we understood, the numbers that they're using was, I think, she contacted North Carolina, that's instituted early voting, and they had something like 30% voting be early voting. And so she's applying those numbers, just applying that same number. I think the reality is I don't think our community will incur anything near to that. You know, if we lived in Northern Virginia and we were accustomed to really long lines, then we might think, hey, let me do the early voting and avoid those big long lines, right?
Where do people vote normally near the library on November the 4th or whatever, you know?
They
I don't
vote.
think that's a decent.
I don't think they vote at the registrar's office, do they?
Yeah.
No, it's
No,
at
it's
the
around back.
library, at the basement. the-
Right.
Yeah, that
back
community
in
room.
The
Yeah, the
community
community
room.
room.
What, could you not relocate the registrar's office for those 45 days to the community room?
Well, the registrar's office is gonna have to stay where it is, I think, but
The early voting, you mean?
Yeah.
I think,
Have those workers down, if we reserve it.
to me, it makes sense to see how it would go. And they've got the voting area downstairs, and they don't have any extra parking on the first Tuesday in November when they vote. And I just think it's senseless to spend a lot of extra taxpayer dollars in anticipation of a huge voter turnout and from an unfunded mandate.
and
I'm
I
certainly
think-
opposed to it.
I think that's where Edgar and I landed at least that's where I landed. I can't speak for Edgar, but he's here, he can speak for himself. But, yeah, I was of the persuasion, I understand we need to have the additional part-time people,
Yeah, no matter what.
but I guess I'm just not anticipating 30% of all the registered voters in Bedford County showing up in those 45 days to vote. Just don't see it happening. I could be completely wrong, but if that, and
Well, they have to wait in
I'll
line
eat
at the-
those words if I'm wrong, but I mean, my thinking is, most people that I know, they like to vote on election day.
Well, people have to wait in line at the
It's
DMV.
part of your civic responsibility, and I think our community is just like that. So, the only time that I would consider early voting would be if I knew I was gonna have to be out of town or something like that. But beyond that, I'm gonna vote on election day, and I suspect that the vast majority are the same. So, that's why I'm not too keen on creating these satellite locations. I think it's an expense that I hope goes away in a couple of years.
I think we should see how it goes, and if there's a tremendous amount of interest, we'll know after the first year.
Yeah. And that would be my recommendation.
Do we have numbers on what percentage did absentee voting before?
I'm sure Barbara sent that to us. I don't
She
remember off the top of my
probably has
head.
it, but, I mean, you can go on the, state board of elections and see, but, I mean, as I recall, I mean, normally when the absentee precinct gets posted, it's a very small percentage. I mean, it's in the single digits for sure. A few percentage points.
But again, I think Mr. Sharp touched on it, and what Barbara had based it on was a little bit of the North Carolina experience, what I think is more than a 40%. It varies by jurisdiction, of course. 40% of people vote early. My experience firsthand, and I supervised the election office to a certain degree when I was in Georgia, was we had, roughly 30-35% of our individuals vote early, and they were. But it was kind of interesting. We talked about this in the personnel committee meeting about. Still, I mean, election day, most people can go to their precinct and get in and out in 15 minutes or less. But even in Athens, where I worked before, we didn't have a whole lot of early voting locations, and we can do it differently as a totally kind of different setup. But yeah, we'd have people stand in line for an hour and a half, in order to vote early instead of voting on election day. And I never quite understood what that was all about, but yeah, but anyways, the percentage is what it is, and so that was what the thought was, is that how convenient do we want to make this, or versus our budget constraints. So.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Can we look into if that, doing that community room?
I will.
We own the building, right? So,
Oh, yeah.
Because on election day, this past year, 1,100 voters came in and voted at the library at that location in one day. So the parking's obviously adequate. Obviously, everybody's not gonna come at this one time. But I think that'd be a probably really good solution to the problem, because the registrar's office upstairs.
Yeah, let them continue what they're doing.
And you don't have to go into the library to get to the room.
All right. We'll check on that immediately. Thank you.
Is that the consensus from the board to
Well-
go that route with just the one location? I mean, the original request was for 3 locations, I think. One in Forest, one Central,
One
and
in
one
Manita.
in Manita. But,
I don't want to spend any money, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, that's-
But I think we're underestimating the impact on one location, because when you're talking about how many came on election day, that's for
one precinct.
one precinct. What we're talking about is the whole Bedford County is going to be voting early, or it's available to the whole county. We're not talking, you're talking about one precinct showing up at the library on election day. We're talking about the whole county. And it's
They've
not going to
got
be one day.
45 days to do it.
Well, exactly, but no one's mentioned the fact that we're talking about the whole county. We're not talking about the one precinct that impacts. I think we're underestimating the impact on one location.
Mr. Chairman, you gotta consider too, the convenience of people. Would they rather, if they're gonna be here on election day, would they rather go in their own area and vote, or drive into Bedford to do it? And we have a huge county, and for me, I just think you're right. I don't think it's gonna be that many because of the whole convenience.
And I think that was their argument for having the 3 locations, to make it more convenient. But I just see this as an unfunded mandate coming down from the state, and, you know, we can legally comply with the mandate from the state with minimal cost if we do the one location. If we find that it's unwieldy, then I think the following year, we're gonna have to make some adjustments, but.
It's a very common sense way to look at it.
But, you know, I also just think that we're not Northern Virginia, you know, and so we don't typically have the long lines. I mean, the longest lines I recall, a number of years ago at Thomas Jefferson Elementary School, right after we split it up into 2 precincts, and it hasn't been like that. I mean, normally, you know, maybe 10, 15 minutes is a pretty normal occurrence for most elections. So I think the vast majority of people are going to vote on election day, whether they have early voting available to them or not.
We'll see.
The final thing I'll say, just to let you know that we tried to do our due diligence, and I'll move on, is that, you know, the state did have on their books this year, it was supposed to be a 10-day of early voting. And that was a law that was passed a couple years ago, and it was supposed to take effect in this upcoming election cycle. And similar to what I think some of the other board members, and I think Mr. Davis just said it too, is that our position, and Barbara spoke on our behalf of Bedford County at some of her different meetings that she was at, was test the 10-day early voting first, and then evaluate that at a state level. And if you want to expand it to 45 days. To us, that makes sense. I mean, you put something out there, you try it out, and then you look to expand it. Well, what the General Assembly did is they already had a law for 10 days without testing or without any other experiences at all. They just decided to expand it to 45 days. So we're in uncharted territory in terms of Virginia as to how this is going to function, because the state decided not to have that intermediate step of evaluation. That was our opinion from a staff perspective. But that didn't win the day.
It would certainly be better if it turns out that we're wholly inadequate. It'd be better if it's 10 days of misery rather than
That's right.
45 days of misery. You know, but
Yeah.
Well, hopefully the 45 days will spread it out enough that.
yeah.
Yeah. Moving on, so we can just continue through the document. There's some other, the Personnel Committee was favorable. There's several reclassifications of employees, and I'm not going to go through those individually. I mean, they're small adjustments, relatively small adjustments based on changes in duties and scopes, and sometimes mandates for different positions in terms of what they have to do. So there are some changes in here, in a tourism office and several in the nursing home for reclassifications of some positions. And again, those are those are all very small changes in terms of, but important for those employees to be recognized for the different types of duties that they're having to assume. This is not a performance change. This is a reclassification based on changes in duties and scope of responsibilities and so forth. So that's what this is, just make sure it's very clear. So the final part I want to review quickly is at the end of the document with the social services in the purple or lavender color is the personnel committee felt relatively, again, if funds exist for us to do this, as we're trying to balance our budget, fairly favorable towards a couple positions in the social services. The family services, foster care specialists, they asked for, actually they're receiving funding from the state for 2 different positions that, as we've discussed in some past budget work sessions, the foster care, caseload, and those types of related services is skyrocketing Bedford County and really driving a good bit of our budget increases. So these are funds that are funded by funded by 84.5% by the state. So it would just be a 15.5% match by the local government. So those are something we would the personnel committee thought, again, at the end of the day, if we can afford it, they thought that was a potentially good use of our resources. And then really DSS's top priority was this family services prevention position. And they've had some good success. We have a couple other of these positions already in the schools, and this is a good prevention type employee who's able to work with families and children to identify issues that are emerging hopefully before they skyrocket and spiral out of control and they get into very, very expensive services and placements. So the school system and social services has found some real good success with a couple other employees. So again, this would be another employee that would be 90% funded by federal monies, and the school was going to kick in funds in order to do that out of their operating budget. And that was something that the social services staff was really wanted to hopefully make this one happen this year if possible. So anyways, those were the new positions that we discussed at the personnel committee and where we are.
I mean, you're paying 10% on one and 15.5% on another. I don't know how you can't fund those.
Right.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
on the assistant county attorney, I don't know how that falls in our rule books or anything, but I mentioned this the other day, that I think that should be, his hiring and firing should be under the umbrella of the board of supervisors.
So I spoke with Patrick. We corresponded a couple times regarding this position, and I'll give credit to Patrick today. He sent me an email and just said, all things considered with the budget matters that the county's facing, he said he's fine holding off on that position for another year until things get better. He said with it being understood that he does have some money in his budget right now to utilize outside counsel for when we have too many cases that he can handle, or if he has conflicts or whatever it might be. As long as he said I have adequate funds in my budget to offset those expenses. So the personnel committee, the question that they asked was, are these outside counsel funds, are they equivalent to what a new position would be? And the answer is no. We spend probably right about half, maybe a little bit less than half of what a new position would cost on outside counsel funds. So there's not an equivalent one-to-one relationship in terms of cost savings. Because that was a discussion the personnel committee was saying, well, if we add this position, are we going to be able to wash out all of our outside counsel funds, and would that be a one-for-one trade? And it's not. It'd be, in this case, it'd be a two-for-one trade. So Patrick politely and professionally said, unless the board really wants to to be generous, but understanding that the budget constraints that we're under, he'd do his best to work under the current situation. So that's all that we have for personnel committee related that's really budget matters. I thought we'd move on. Thank you, Don. Unless there's any other final questions for Don.
Thank you, Don.
Okay.
Is the board okay with staff is now recommending? This is information, but I mean, I think ideally we give them some guidance as to where we are. And for the most part, we're just trying to do this where, if they can save the money in their current budget, pay for it, then we were okay with it. And, or in the case of social services, we're getting, we're paying 10 cents on the dollar or whatever, that makes sense.
Sadly enough, it does.
And
You
then,
gotta have it.
and then obviously, part-time positions for the registrar's office. But each one of them seem to be, I think, from our estimation, I think Edgar and I both agreed that this is probably the route to go. I appreciated staff, by the way. Robert in particular, he recognizes the situation we're in, and he's trying to be reasonable in what he's bringing to us. And he's filtered out a lot of this stuff. And so, I have a lot of confidence in what he's bringing to us.
Okay. All right. Well, moving on to another big item. I'm going to ask for some help with Ashley, and if Sheldon will make his way into the room, wherever he might be. Talk a little bit about CIP. Do they have this in front of them?
They do. We were to pass it out.
Is it the green one?
It has, yeah, with
The green and yellow.
Okay.
Okay. So we've, the first version of the CIP that you saw when we had our joint meeting with our school board, now granted that meeting we mostly talked about school-related matters. It was really a request list and hadn't really been filtered through with the budget, realistic budget parameters that we have. So over the last week or so, we've taken another stab at the CIP, moved a number of projects around. We've also ratcheted back some of the requests back to similar to what there are currently in the capital improvement program. And we've also moved a number of, basically everything that's marked in yellow is something that's changed since the last time you saw this document, essentially, if I can sum it up. And we've moved a number of projects from operating revenue into fund balance. So one of our targets, and Ashley, correct me if I'm wrong, is that over the years, we typically fund the capital improvement program by about $3.4 million in operating revenue. So we've typically had a transfer from the operating revenue to a CIP fund of about $3.4 million. So we took it upon ourselves to say, all right, that's our challenge, is that we need to get the CIP for FY21 at the very least as what we're traditionally have done. Now, last year we ended up funding more, but this year we obviously don't have the funds to do that. That's just not realistic at all. So that's what these maneuverings in yellow do, is some projects have been delayed. Sheldon, myself, and Ashley and Amanda, we were talking about this afternoon. We've really tried to concentrate on some of the renovation projects and repairs that are much more almost life safety oriented. So, for example, fire alarms. We have some fire alarm systems that the fire marshal has been kind of, not real happy about our situation on. And so that's something that's a life safety matter. But yet, if we want to reshingle a roof and it's not showing any real signs of leaking or anything like that, well, we don't need to reshingle that roof this year. We can push that off for a year or two. So that's kind of been the approach that we took with this, the best we could, is to try to try to really differentiate what's absolutely needed or versus what could be delayed just a little bit longer. And I don't want to go through this project by project necessarily. Trying to think of some high points here.
Can I ask your color coding, what's yellow and what's green?
So, good question. So green are actually new projects. So those are projects that are brand new that were submitted this year, that this was kind of the first time that would have been included in the CIP. So that's what the green is. And then the yellow is just changes that we made to the spreadsheet from the last time you've seen this. I guess it probably would have been about 6 weeks ago now when we had our joint meeting with the school board. So that's a good question. I'm sorry, I should have said what green was to begin with. So, we do have a number of HVAC repairs and replacements in a few of our facilities. I mean, some of them also are recurring HVAC where we're saving up for replacement down the road. So we don't have to. Typically, it's hard in government for us to have to. I don't know how much a chiller for a courthouse would cost, but if it's $800,000, $900,000, that's hard for us to come up in 1 year. But if we can dedicate $150,000 a year for 6 or 7 years, that's better for us to be able to in a position to fund that project. So that's where you see a good bit of this. Some of these expenses too is we're gradually saving up for replacement in 5, 6 years down the road. So that's where a number of this is. In the fire and rescue area, those are formulas that the board has worked out with fire and rescue in the past and with our volunteer agencies, and we're trying to still adhere to those formulas that we've worked out with funding cycles for replacing those apparatuses out in the community and with the different volunteer agencies and departments too. So we didn't really touch a whole lot of that, other than that there may have been a request for some increases, and we did not recommend those increases. We're ratcheted those back to where they are currently. Probably one big decision point, and I don't know if we have to make this decision tonight, but we're going to have some conversation certainly going forward, is our closure of our landfill. So, and I might need some help from Ashley and Sheldon on this one. So as you may recall, so it's in about the middle of the page under Public Works. We have landfill closure, and we have a figure out there for fiscal year 22 for $3.5 million. So, and there's a number of ways we can close this landfill and pay for it. So what this thinks about is we have $3 million set aside in a fund right now to help close the landfill and work towards that, knowing that it's going to cost 6.5-ish. We don't have the bids yet, but just on some engineering estimates, it could be in that neighborhood. The thought was to look at putting in $3.5 million out there, but looking potentially at a debt service issuance. So if you go with me for a second, and Ashley will go over this in a minute on our other final sheet. For a number of years, we've been dedicating $500,000 a year towards a landfill closure in cash out of our operating revenues. So we're kind of at a point where we don't have enough cash to pay for this outright, but then you also don't necessarily want to take on a mortgage if you don't have to have a mortgage. But the good news is the way there could be good opportunities for getting favorable lending rates right now in the very near future that we may want to take advantage of in order to work for this landfill closure. And of course, the landfill closure, there are a lot of expenses you have to do in a couple years, but we're working on the landfill closure for 20-something years. And this isn't something that happens overnight. So it sort of makes sense that if we want to spend these monies and pay back the monies over time, we could do that. So anyways, this is a conversation we're going to have a little bit more in depth as to, it's hard to spend that's almost a whole work session unto itself, and we have some financial advisors run us some different scenarios as to what that might look like. But that does have, if we do a debt service issuance for this landfill, it does have potential impacts on what we're already budgeting into that landfill, because we would likely, the payments for that debt would be less expensive than the $500,000 that we're contributing annually right now. I guess that's the ultimate point that I want to make with that. So anyways, if there's any other questions about that as we go through the evening, feel free to ask those, but that is a decision point that is a lot of money but how we do this might free up other funds or allow us to save funds in order to balance this budget going forward. I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a
Yes.
question?
I'll let other people ask questions. I've probably talked enough.
I know that Lynchburg Business Regional Alliance did some engineering research for us for that Montvale site, right? So that we can grade it. For us waiting a year, will that engineer do all that work that they already paid for? Will that still, we can still use it? Is it dated where they can only use it for, does anyone know that?
So,
We're good for 5 years?
yeah, I think it's multiple years. I can double check with Tracy. She would know the ins and outs.
I would hate to waste that money, that they
Yeah.
gave us for that.
It's valid for 5 years.
Okay, good.
I think it is, yeah. I guess I was thinking by the time we engineer it and want to actually do it, maybe waiting another year might be good to do that. And this is an outside chance, but you never know with what stimulus monies might come down from where and who and how. There might be other funding that we can get where we don't have to pay for this at all, or we can match a grant or something like that. So that was it. Maybe that's a hope and a prayer, but thinking that it wasn't going to impact that work that the Alliance did that you're referencing wouldn't negatively impact it.
I think it would be smart to hold off on Montvale. There's, right now in these times we're in, for the county to spend money, if the county has to spend money out of their pocket for that, a lot of people are going to be reluctant to expand in business.
Another item on this CIP that just something we're going to have to solve at some point is, and I know Mr. Davis and I have talked about this, and we were going to tour the building, but that got canceled due to some scheduling difficulties with some other folks. But the Montvale Library and the old school, there's a good bit of money in here in the CIP scheduled for that whole facility. There's money in there to make some roof repairs to the existing library. There's money in here to demolish the old school. There's also money in out years to build a new library. So at some point, we do need to make a decision as to what do we want to do with that whole structure in Montvale. And like I said, I don't know if we have to make that decision tonight, but at some point, we do need to decide what we want to do so we can decide a direction with these monies.
Yes.
The folks in Montvale are entitled to some opinion in that, and for years Bedford's been making decisions for Montvale, and I've been talking to the folks out there, and they have agreed, number one, if that building can be turned around and I think it's got to be looked at before, I'm not going to get into a big discussion about that, but I think we need to consider the folks in Montvale. I've asked them to come to us with recommendations and firm ideas and plans, what they wish to do with that before we make the decision to demolish it. I don't think we should plan to put any more money in that to fix it than we can to demolish it. But we owe them the benefit of the doubt before we just say we're going to tear it down and live with it.
And to Mr. Davis's point, that's one of the reasons why we put it out one more year. If we can, of course, it's again worse and worse disrepair another year, but that give us adequate time in order to do that analysis that I think Mr. Davis is requesting.
Well, it's a building that certainly could be useful if those folks will put it to good use out there.
But
I'll just say, and I spoke to you about this.
Sure.
I know years ago, and I might be the only one that went on that tour. Has anyone else been inside that building? I was a little surprised at how in disrepair it was. But, you know, I'm all for, you know, given due consideration. But I also understand you know, money's not unlimited, obviously, especially this year. But even if it was a good year, you know, we have to consider costs as well. So.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I agree with you on that, but seems like the Forest Library, I know we keep putting it off, but that number keeps growing every year too, like $4.5 million. And I don't know what they need that costs $4.5 million. And another question I'd like to ask for everyone is, all the way everything's going with computers and online, new Wi-Fi and all that stuff, how much library space do we need? It seems like they're pushing people more away from it.
It's impossible to hear you. Could you speak?
How are they hearing them out there if they can't hear me from here to there?
We can't hear you out here.
Oh,
And they probably can't hear you on the line.
okay. Anyway, I don't know if it's some kind of questions that need to be asked about libraries as far as what direction they're going to go in, and as far as broadband and all that stuff. I don't have the answer. I'm just saying, when we see $4.5 million to expand a library, is that more or less a meeting area, or is it used really for a library? I don't know.
I think, Mr. Scott, that's a good question. I know when I was at when I was at the VACO conference in November, I know I went to one session about libraries, and it was interesting to me about the transition that libraries are making into a much more of a community center, kind of like what you were talking about, Mr. Scott, than just traditional checking out books. Of course, that happens, but they almost become satellite community centers for all sorts of, I know they do job fairs, they have different groups that rent out the rooms, and different clubs and all sorts of organizations. So it's certainly evolving, but I understand what you're talking about. What does the future of all that look like? Yeah.
I think I have to agree with Mr. Scott. I'd be really, really interested in knowing exactly what the return to Bedford County taxpayers is going to be for $4.5 million for a library expansion. Again, folks are, brick and mortar is rapidly going away in a lot of areas.
Yeah, and it's enforced, and I would agree. I mean, fortunately, that's out in fiscal year #24. There's lots of decisions to be made between now and then, but yeah, I mean, I certainly want to see what we're getting for $4.5 million before we consider
To
spending.
that regard, Mr. Chairman, I've mentioned a couple times that they could use the community room that they have now and change that into they want they want to expand their children's library section, which is admirable. And I want to see them do that. And if they could expand it into that room that they have now, and then we have in the CIP where we're going to pave a trail to connect it to the Forest Park and Rec Center, and there is a huge meeting room with a huge kitchen and another smaller reading room right there. If they just paved that trail and they could connect the two, I think we could do it. Have both. I think we could have a great rec room, a great meeting room, and the children's library.
So that being said, what about the $300,000 for expansion planning?
Well, right now, we're worried about fiscal year '21 primarily, right?
Yeah, primarily. I mean, but to Mr. Davis's question, the way I kind of have these, and you'll see some of the other projects, is you spend some money the year before on planning and designing and all that type of thing, and then you go out to bid, and then the following year you do your construction. So that's sort of the flow of how the money is spent. So really where we are with the CIP, as of right now, of course, we can still maneuver these things around a little bit, is we've reduced it down to this fiscal year being, the $3,465,000 worth of operating funds, which is consistent with what we've done in the past. And there is some funds coming out of fund balance, which isn't out of the ordinary for what we spent before, of $1.7 million out of fund balance, which is be one-time expenditures. Truly one-time expenditures. We paid special attention to those projects we're saving up for. That's not a fund balance project. That's an operating revenue project. But something's truly one-time, then that's like an HVAC replacement or a, shoring up the floor joists in this building. That's a one-time expense that hopefully we'll have to worry about again for 25 years or more, or hopefully longer. Some of those would be done through fund balance. Some of the technology projects are one-time only, and those are fund balance also. So that's where we are as of right now, and I don't know. But we can keep on working on this, but that's where we are. If there's any other questions or comments?
Question. Maybe I'm getting too far ahead. What is the $1 million for the forest renovation and expansion in light of the fact that we've got a flat enrollment there or possibly declining?
This is
The new growth.
This is the part of that weaning off of the state monies. Quite frankly, allocating it to the Forest Middle School renovation and expansion gives me a little heartburn because I don't see that as our role. Our role is we are basically taking money that and forcing money to go into CIP for the school system because their CIP and maintenance fund was at 0, and obviously that's not a realistic number. And so we're trying to. And I'm sure you probably recall when we had the vote at the Forest Elementary School. Was that? I'm sorry, the Bedford Elementary School. How long ago was that?
2 years ago.
2 years ago. That's the CIP transfer to the schools that had been at 0, and all of it was just going into operations, and they were spending it. So now we say, okay, it's $500,000 one year, and then it was $1 million the next, 1.5 million, and then over the course of 8 years, it becomes $4 million in that 8th year. And then the next year, the money that the state's transferring to Bedford County is going to go away, and so will the CIP money. So that way the operations don't take a huge hit, because the alternative was it was going to be devastating to the school system and or the taxpayers of Bedford County, and we didn't want either one. So this is really money going to CIP. The school system's just determining where they want to put it. That's their decision. In fact, I'm surprised that the 1.5 in fiscal year 22 is slated for Forest Middle School. In fact, that might be where it is right now, but I don't know if this current board's going to decide to do that or not, but that's the school board decision.
Yeah.
So, I think it's more of just a CIP transfer to the school system.
Yeah, I think to Mr. Sharp's point, Mr. Davis, typically we would just put that $1 million on that top line under schools. It says kind of balanced new growth funding. We've just been told that that's what they're going to spend it on. They anticipate. That might change. Like I said, a different board, they may have different ideas, but that's what we've been told. So we just put it there.
I wasn't on the board then, but I went to the meeting and I remember it. And what I recall because you made the motion, was that you will give them $500,000 that year, increased by $500,000 each year, accumulative, and that pretty much washes our hands of that. But what I'm wondering is the line below it with the 1.6 million in FY22. Is that not part of the
I don't know where that
500,000.
money's gonna come from, because I'm not paying for it.
Exactly. I don't know why the 1.6 is there, because I thought that was all encompassed in your.
That's correct, and they gotta
original
figure out where they're gonna spend it.
Right.
So
Thank you.
maybe that 1.5 for the Forest Middle School ends up being transferred to the Forest Middle School roof
Yeah,
HVAC,
yeah.
flooring and paint. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the school board decision. But I mean, I have to say, I don't intend to come up with anything more than 1.5.
1.5.
That's
what
correct.
you
That's
said.
what we said,
That's
and everybody agreed to it, and everybody was happy that
And
night.
celebrated.
I remember a bunch of cheering, so we have to stick to it.
Well, just to make a note here, when I met with staff when we went through this, these line items for Big Island and Forest Elementary were in for this next fiscal year, so we took those out because of just what you just said. They're getting $1 million.
Use it the way you want.
Spend it wisely.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, and then next year will be 1.5. I mean, they can have this wish list, but that's what it is, it's a wish list. That's not my job to determine how they're gonna spend the money.
I'm surprised that we're still seeing the 1.6 there,
I am too.
because we
to be
addressed
honest.
that at our last, we addressed that at the joint meeting.
Right.
They're gonna get
1.5.
the 1 in fiscal year 21, 1.5 in fiscal year 22, 2 in fiscal year 23. I mean, we thought that, I mean, the goal was that would make their job easier because it know what they were dealing with and could plan accordingly.
And it was a guarantee. I mean, it was.
That's correct.
They could plan on it.
Right. I mean, and when you get out there, year 8, it was $4 million in that 1 year. But, and the whole idea was, you know, much easier to plan because otherwise it had 0. There was no planning. So, anyway.
Okay, and again, we're available for any other questions, whether it's this evening or another time about capital improvements or projects, or if there's any questions or concerns or anything. But again, just in the interest of time, I thought I'd move on to our final document, and this is something that we were hot off the presses, we've been working on up until like 4 o'clock this afternoon. So, do they have that, or
Yeah, I handed.
I'm gonna let
out
Ashley
an
kind of lead
updated
this discussion.
General fund summary sheet. This is different even though it's in your packet because we've been working very diligently this weekend and today to try to reduce that deficit. So does everybody have that? It's the one with the 1.7 million. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of go through the big changes, just kind of give you an overview of what's changed since the 3/16 meeting, which was, I believe, the last time this was handed out, and then if you have questions, let me know. So in revenues, we had a couple of reductions. Given the current state of things, we have decided to take our sales tax back to level funding compared to this year's budget, so that was a reduction of $440,000. We also had a reduction in CSA revenues of $71,700, and that is directly corresponded to a reduction in CSA expenditures of $125,000. I was able to go back with an additional month of expenditures under our belt and kind of review and was able to bring those projections down a little bit. So not huge in the grand scheme of things, but every little bit helps. Those were the only major changes to revenue so far. I am keeping an eye on things with meals tax. We have projected a bit of an increase there, but as we were talking the other day, you know, initially your thought would be that that would take a huge hit, but there's long lines at the drive-thrus. There's a lot of people doing takeout, so we're going to kind of watch that situation and see if we need to reduce the meals tax revenue as well. But at this time, we have not. We left it at a $100,000 increase. The other thing to keep in mind too with the sales tax and meals tax revenues, well, sales tax, excuse me, there's a 2-month delay, so we're not really going to see the effects of what's happening now until June or July, which is not great from a budget perspective because all we can do is try to look into our crystal ball, but we're not really going to know until June after we've adopted the budget. So we've kind of talked about maybe doing some mid-year revisions and seeing if we need to amend our budget at all if revenues are looking drastically different than we're anticipating now. From an expenditure perspective, there have been various changes throughout the departments, just going back, doing cleanup, re-looking at notes from our different review sessions that we had. cleaning up our staffing. You know, I look at it as of a certain date, because obviously I have to cut off at some point. So I went back and looked at staffing as of February 29th, which was our last complete payroll, and then looking at all of our vacancies that we have available, talking to departments about which positions they think they might fill, which ones they think they might not. And so we were able to realize some reductions there. But the biggest reduction in expenditures was due to a decrease in the transfer to CIP, which is a direct result of the changes that you see in this sheet here. We were able to reduce that transfer by 1.03 million. As far as the discussion items are concerned, those numbers, most of them have changed, just again, due to going back and cleaning things up. VRS rate increases, we went ahead and built those into the budget because that's not optional. It's a rate that we have to realize. So that is built into the expenditures that you see above. The discretionary revenues to the schools, that has decreased to $267,000, and that is a direct result of the reduction in discretionary revenues that we talked about with sales tax.
So if I can interrupt, that might be something I think it was alluded to at our last budget work session, and of course, I don't know what the state budget's going to look like and all sorts of other things, but we did talk, I think that some comments were made. So this $267,000 is above what the $500,000 we would be giving for the CIP purposes. Right. So again, if at the end of the day, if we got to balance a budget, that could be a potential source.
Especially if, well, we don't know what the state's going to do at this point. I mean, I certainly think they need to revise their numbers. I saw some data that said that state budget may be affected by $1 billion due to this virus. So I'm certainly hoping they revisit a number of things like the minimum wage. And so we don't know what that transfer to the school is going to look like. But I don't recall the exact number, but it was in the $3 to $3.5 million increase last week that you told us, as far as the state number to the schools, the state increase.
I don't recall that.
I think it was 2.3 million from just the state.
Yeah, it might
2.3. Okay.
Just state.
All right. So I mean, obviously, we're not seeing anything like that. So I mean, I have a hard time believing that that's going to be able to stay there. So I think it's all in flux right now. But if it were to stay there, then I think this 267 may have to be considered. But if that goes away, then I'm not sure we can consider it, because they probably have insurance increases, and they've got VRS increases and things like that as well, I'm sure.
Actually, their insurance did increase.
It did. What about VRS?
Yeah, it did go up.
It did increase, not as much as ours, but it was almost a 1 full %.
Okay. So I'm sure they have some costs that they can't escape as well. So and I do want to stick to the CIP agreement. I think that's important to wean them off of the state monies. But anyway, I think everything's going to have to be on the table at this point. But it's all in flux.
Speaking of everything being on the table, I'd like to just, as far as, I feel like the state has given us an opportunity to ease the taxpayer burden on our property owners by allowing counties to tax cigarettes, gas, meals, and occupancy. I don't think we'll get much out of occupancy, and we're already taxing meals, and I'm not looking for a new tax, but what I'm looking for is a way to alleviate some of the burden on our property owners in Bedford County, because if you go with gas and cigarette tax, lessen the property tax, or the pressure on the property tax, it's more than just our property owners that buy gas and buy cigarettes. It's people that visit Bedford County.
There's a lot of poor people in Bedford County, Mr. Johnson, who can't afford to pay more taxes for gasoline. Certainly they don't need to be smoking cigarettes and using tobacco.
So what I'm saying about that is that if we can get the revenue coming in from the gas and the cigarette, it's not all Bedford County. I understand some of it is, but you're able to maybe lower the price of lower the tax rate.
I think we need to find ways to cut spending before we look at ways to increase taxes on folks
Not
around.
increasing taxes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm misunderstanding you perhaps. Is that money coming to us from the state, the gas tax and the cigarette tax?
Part of it will be coming from out of Bedford County.
So
You're suggesting that we increase fuel taxes to folks in Bedford County?
If you increase fuel taxes, you're increasing taxes on everybody that buys fuel in Bedford County, not just property owners.
Right, but I'm just saying, that's what you're suggesting.
I'm suggesting it's on the table, that we should look at it.
I think, I'd like to ask, do we really need to grow our budget $4 million in the total general fund expenditures? Why can't we, we're asking everybody else to maintain level funding, why do we have to grow our budget $4 million in the total expenditures?
A lot of the things that have increased in salaries and benefits, for example, is not anything that we have any control over. I mean, we have to increase the VRS rates, we have to increase the group life rates. That's not an option, but we have gone back and we've definitely worked very hard with the departments to cut out anything that's unnecessary. We can certainly go back and scrub these lines further, and we will. But this is just, after initial conversations with the board, with staff, this is where we've come to. And I don't think there's a lot of bloat, if you will, in these numbers.
And remember, the two major drivers, and there's others in there, and they're baked into this expenditure kind of roll-up numbers. The two biggest things out there is what we've discussed during the Big Rocks meeting is a solid waste, going into the transfer station business and having to do basically budget for two different facilities, and the big loss in revenue with the town of Bedford now transferring their commercial waste to Pittsylvania County. And that's a $500,000 hit right there. And then, so we have a substantial increase in solid waste, and the other big one, which is, it's hard to budget for, is the whole Comprehensive Services Act of the services of families and children who are referred to all these placements and services and so forth that the court does and, what mandated to do. So
$2 million
that's
is the
a bulk
overall
of it.
increase in the CSA. And that's, again, as Mr. has said, that's not something that we can really control, where the courts put these children.
Right, I guess I'm looking at things like recreation and culture, community development, non-departmental. There's some significant increases in that area.
I would need to go back and look at the details to tell you exactly what's making that up, but keep in mind too that we did do pay increases as of July 1, so that is baked in there as well. So there's just a lot of cost. I mean, when you look at each individual department without salaries and benefits in there at all, most departments are within a few thousand of where their budget was last year.
There's a lot of folks in Bedford County that aren't going to get pay increases this year and haven't had them in a long time.
But we've already issued these as of July 1. I mean, we can't take them away, so we're not proposing any in future increases, but that is part of the cost increase that you're seeing here as compared to last year. Because last year it wasn't in those figures. Any other questions on
But
that?
going to the discussion items, there are some options there if you want to go over those real quick.
Just real quick, a few other changes in the discussion items. We were able to decrease the estimated cost of the 3 satellite sites. I think we've all heard some discussion here, but just to revisit, the original estimate on that was $191,000. We were able to take that down to $125,000 after further discussion with Barbara on that. There's also been some decreases in the DSS state proposed amounts due to adjustments in the state share of that, plus again, some staffing cleanup in the staff file that I've worked with. And then I was also able to incorporate the calculation of cost of a 2% bonus for constitutional officers, which is currently in the state budget. Now, whether or not that will survive given the economic realities of today, I don't know, but it does appear that that is optional based on the language. I'm waiting for confirmation on that, but as of right now, I believe that that is optional, not something that we would be required to do. We just wouldn't receive the funds if we did.
No, on the satellite sites, I see 125.13 here. But the number that we were looking at was like
18 and change.
If we don't use the 3 satellites and we just
Right. And I just wanted to put in the highest cost here so we see the worst case scenario. So one thing that I have done.
After
is-
tonight, that'll change
Right.
for this purposes.
Okay.
Right, based on your discussions here tonight, we'll reduce that.
Because that'll save us another 100,000.
And so, I put together, obviously, we can cut all these different options various different ways and come up with, any combination of suggestions here, but I put together 3 potential options for, taking care of this $1.7 million deficit. The first option is the most extreme. We can eliminate all of the optional items that you see in the discussion items box, as well as the discretionary revenues to the schools. That we could also potentially take away the $500,000 to reserve for solid waste based on the idea that we're no longer going to be expanding, and the thought that we could potentially do some debt service there. But what we would need to keep in mind with that is if we take that $500,000 away this year to help balance the operating budget, we would need to be prepared to add that back in future years for debt service, because we would no longer be setting money aside for debt service. And $6.5 million for 20 years is about $450,000 a year, so that's pretty well a wash. But that is an option for the current year if we wanted to just keep that $500,000 in general fund. We could also do away with the transient occupancy reserve. So when we increased the rate several years ago, it was the board's will that all of that revenue go towards tourism. And so what we do each year is we calculate how much we have remaining on revenues after we fund the tourism department and the various other initiatives that the board might indicate that they would like to fund. And then whatever's left, we set aside in reserve. From a legal obligation standpoint, we've done what we are required to do with those monies. So the money that's left over technically is county money to use in general fund. So another option for balancing would be to not set that money aside this year and to actually use it in the operating
And that's
budget.
44,000. So
That is $87,900 for the
it's
current year.
44,000 last year.
Yeah, based on current year projections.
I'd be fine with that.
Okay. Another option is we had been setting aside in fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20 school debt service savings. I believe that the original intent of that was to help with the reversion payback, but since the new plan has been put together with the $500,000 in new growth each year, that is no longer needed. So I have plugged the number in there based off of what we've done in the past, but we can certainly take that out and again let that roll back into our operating revenues. So that would be an extra $167,000 roughly.
I'd be fine with that. The $500,000 one for the solid waste, I'm a little reluctant,
Okay.
and I'll explain why. Back in 2008, when we entered into, the housing crisis and the budget suffered, that's where the money came from. And that's how we got ourselves in this situation now where we're playing catch up. And we don't want that number to increase in future years. We know that that number needs to be there. We're not going to be able to escape those costs. So we're sort of kicking the can down the road if we take it away.
And again, this is just the most extreme option that I put together here. Because even if we did all of that, we would still potentially need to look at freezing vacant positions for 3 months. And so anything that's currently vacant, we would not fill before October 1st, if I just did my math correctly, and that would give us an additional savings of about $500,000. If we did all of that with the 3 months of vacancy savings, we would be about $18,000 to the good. And that is with taking the 45 days of early voting down to the general registrar's office plus 1 satellite site, which is $78,000 for the 2 of those. So again, depending if I take it down to the $18,000, then that would be an additional $60,000, which would get us $78,000 to the good. So that's the most extreme option. Another option would be to, again, do away with all of those optional items under discussion items, along with the discretionary revenues to the schools, but add back the $500,000 reserve for solid waste and the transient occupancy reserve. And then if we did that along with 9 months of vacancy, freezing vacant positions, then that would get us about $108,000 to the good.
You can't get rid of the health insurance increase though, can you?
No, I didn't, no, that's still in there.
Yeah, I was going to say.
You're talking about the things that are not
That don't have an
mandated.
asterisk beside it.
Okay, okay, all right.
Right.
Sorry.
Because I was thinking, you can't escape
No,
it.
can't escape that one.
We went through this.
So I mean, to piggyback on something Ashley's talked about, so we've, as every other business in Bedford County or in America for that reason, is having to talk about that, what to do with your workforce moving forward. That was something that I started to broach with our department heads and constitutional officers today. At least I broke the bad news that we're going to be working on freezing the vacant positions that are there right now. And we're going to come up with a little policy document as to, they would not be filled unless they meet certain criteria, and those criteria are still yet to be defined. We're working on that, and that'd still be up to some discretion. That wouldn't automatically be filled. That would be left up to, my discretion, quite frankly, I guess, or I can take it to the finance committee if we need to, or personnel committee, I mean. But anyways, we're going to put together a little guidance document about what basically freezing positions, at least initially for 90 days, but if we want to do it for a bigger budget strategy, we can make it for the next 180 days if we need to, just in response to this whole crisis and everything else. It just, and we just have to, we have to make those types of tough decisions, and every other organization and private sector business is having to make those tough decisions too. So it's not that we're trying to punish anybody or trying to take away services. It's just, it's just something we have to work through, and it's a challenge that all of us have to deal with.
And so the last option that I put together was, again, taking out all of those optional items, but adding back in the discretionary revenue to the schools, the solid waste reserve, and the transient occupancy reserve, with freezing vacant positions for the entire year, and that would put us $237,000 to the good. Again, these are just quick options I threw together just to kind of give us an idea and let us start thinking about the different combination of things that we can do to help balance the budget. I do think we will have to do some form of freezing positions. I just don't see us getting there any other way, but we can play around. Maybe we want to do some of these additional, optional things and not all of them, and then we just kind of fluctuate the number of months that we freeze positions to help balance that out. I do have, if we wanted to freeze positions for 6 months, it would save us about $793,000. So those are just options that we have, and I'm open to any direction that you all have, any questions that you have.
The final thing I'll just say, and then we'll get into questions, is just I sent an email earlier this week to Edgar and John as finance committee members, and just said, hey, we still haven't quite worked out our guidance document for that yet, but really limiting our expenditures for essential purchases only. So we're going to ratchet back our discretionary spending that is occurring within our organization as a result of the coronavirus and all its financial pressures that's putting on our organization, and probably put a hold on certain projects that are currently that are underway, that we have discretion to hold, and so forth. So that's we're putting together a little policy document about that as well, because we've got to limit our non-essential spending right now too.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I'm not for increasing anybody's taxes for any reason. And today especially, and last week, numerous people I know in a small business, they don't even know if they're going to have a job or a business 30 days from now. So everybody, even for my own business, a couple of weeks ago, I had more on my plate than I can handle, and everybody's canceling everything to see where this thing goes. So who knows what's going to happen. So I think we need to do whatever's necessary to balance the budget. Y'all find the cuts, recommend them, do whatever you have to, but just balance the budget, and we'll look at that. But we need to look at this from a government position and relate it over to the private sector. And if they got to suffer and they got to do all these cuts, then we need to do the same thing. That's my opinion. And I would not vote for any kind of tax increase at this time. We just need to tighten our belts and do what's necessary to make it work. And I honestly feel like what you just said a minute ago, I don't even know how we make good decisions. We might have to pull back and look at this 2 months from now, 4 months from now, 5 months from now. We'll all be in a deeper hole 5 months from now than we ever all thought we'd ever get into. And then again, it might turn around and we can relook at it and come back up with these things. But I don't know how anybody can figure this out at this time.
I have to agree with Mr. Scott. I certainly would be opposed to any tax increase in Bedford County. Folks are going to be having to buckle down and tighten up. Today the governor announced all non-essential businesses are shutting down. It's going to wind up costing our country, our state, our county a lot of money. I guess I'm missing the point here, and maybe this is something I need to revisit when we come back to it. But looking at some of the increases in the general fund expenditures, 20%, 10%, 5%, 7%, 20% across the border, I really want to look at that closely. How can we ask all the departments in the county to flatline their spending, and yet the general fund is going up $4 million? And we're looking at a $1.7 million deficit if we don't make any cuts. And then the Department of Social Services is only asking for $20,000 for a couple people, which a moment ago we were all in favor of.
So,
I may be misreading that, but that's what I'm looking
the general
at.
fund expenditures for the fiscal year 21 proposed are actually only up about 1.5 million from the fiscal year 20 budget.
I'm looking at $105 million for fiscal year 19 and $109
That's
million.
actual expense versus 109 million is what it was budgeted for the current fiscal year, for fiscal year 20. That's just budget.
Yeah.
That's not where we're actually at necessarily. I mean, I would have to go back and do projections.
But
to see
$4
where I
million
think we're
is a lot of money to be raising, especially
But
at
that's
this
not,
time.
we're only proposing 1.5 increase from this year to next year, and a large part of that is salaries and benefits.
And like I said,
CSA.
we need to look at the salaries and the benefits.
What's the VRS that we can't get away from? It's state sticking that down our throat. I mean, you know, a lot of this stuff rolls downhill and we just have to deal with it. Again, unfunded mandates, right? But, you know, I agree with you. I mean, I look at 401k and IRA just being decimated in the private sector, and you know, unless you were a senator with inside information, for the most part, you took a huge hit, and you know, and yet public sector employees probably don't realize how good they got it because they got guarantees. And so, what does that mean to the local government? It just means an increase in the VRS contribution. Paid for by the taxpayers to guarantee their retirement doesn't get decimated like ours does. It's a tremendous benefit that public sector employees, if nothing else, we should at least emphasize it. So, you know, as they see an increase in their insurance premium and a little less take-home pay, they should at least be aware that the benefit they get with their retirement package is far better than anything that the private sector is looking at right now. And that's if the private sector can even keep their job. So, you know, it's a pretty dire situation for small businesses out there. If you work in the food service industry, you're hurting unless you work in the drive-thru. If there's so many people right now, the unemployment benefit, they're getting slammed for unemployment claims. It's just, that's going to skyrocket. The market's tanking. This is a huge impact, much greater than what we saw in 2008.
And I certainly hope that it's not something that's more permanent, but if it lasts for very long, I think it will be, and we're gonna have a difficult time to pull out of this. It's gonna be years in the making.
Payback's gonna be tough.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I don't want to see our citizens paying any more in taxes. I don't want to see their taxes go up. I would like to see them pay less in taxes because they're going to have less money to operate on. I think if we can, I don't know, I wish we could find a way to find an answer to this without it costing anybody any more money. I worry about the services that we provide to our citizens being reduced, which is, I think it's entirely possible that at the end of what we do, we could see a reduction in some of our services. I don't know the answer. I just hope we can get through it and provide services that our citizens are paying for without, we can just make the cuts and keep the services. I don't know how we do that.
The problem is nobody else knows.
Right.
Yeah.
They talking, on the news today, they're talking about skipping a recession now, going to a depression. So who do you believe and who knows what's going to happen?
Well, I believe my business because that's reality. And
Yeah.
This morning, turn the TV on tonight and see the advertisers that they're not there. They're not. And when businesses stop advertising, yeah, that's a pretty clear signal.
That's why I'm so glad we did what we did with the registrar's office on that 45-day thing, the mandate. We need to cut it to the bare bones. We'd sit out, charge taxes, and put 20 places out there. Sure, everybody's going to go out there. If I have one set up 10 yards from my house, I'm going to go vote just because we set it up there. But if they can't vote on the regular day, they really should be voting for like absentee, in my opinion. And I don't know why we have to finance 45 days of voting in 3 locations just because a bunch of people in Richmond want to do it. If they want to pay for it, we'll do it. They don't know where they're going to get the money to pay for all the stuff they passed this year, so I'm glad we did what we did, keep it to the bare bones.
Mr. Chairman. Hello.
Yes.
This is the worst place to sit right here. First, I want to thank staff because I was with them for about 2 hours, and that deficit you see today was about $4 million a week ago. So you made a lot of great progress, and I just want to call that out. For me, as far as in the discussion items, if we're unable to give our regular employees increases, we cannot fund the constitutional departments either. So that's completely off the plate for me. But I think with your options that you were discussing, we can certainly get there. I agree with a lot of the recasting here of some revenue estimates as well. And as we said, we'll have to go back through and look at this again, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it's going to take, because this is evolving. But I just wanted to call out that y'all have done a great job from where we were a week ago.
Yeah, and I would ditto that, and I also agree, the 125 goes down to 18. I think the 131, that's going to go away. A number of these can go away. And I certainly hope the minimum wage one goes away, at least for this year. I would think the General Assembly would come to their senses and say, hey, let's wait a year before we implement this or something. Just because businesses are getting slammed.
How far away are we with what we just discussed?
I think we're getting close.
Under $1 million?
The tourism money, the school debt savings, all those. Again, the one that I was reluctant to go away was the solid waste one, just because
we'd have to make up the 500,000 in a future year. So I'm reluctant to go there. I just feel like I'm borrowing against the future, and I don't really want to do that if I can avoid it. So I'd rather tighten my belt elsewhere if I can. But
I wouldn't say that we were under $1 million now, but we would probably be close to $1 million. If I'm hearing you correctly, so you're thinking, we'll eliminate the reserve for transient occupancy, eliminate the school debt service savings reserve. Based on earlier conversation, I'm thinking we would keep in the 2 foster care positions and the 1 school position, which actually that isn't in this number. I apologize, but the 11,000 for the 2 foster care positions, we would keep that in there based on your conversations earlier. We could eliminate the pay band increases are required. We could eliminate the compression adjustment and the 2 bonus lines, because I believe that those are all optional. And then we would reduce the 45 days early voting to 18,000.
Did I understand that we've already moved the 328 off of the water line to Bonita Park? Did someone tell me that?
I mentioned it, but we have not moved it.
You have not done it. Much as I would hate to see that happen,
That's coming out of fund balance. That won't help
it
you.
won't help.
Mr. Chair,
yes,
I know this might sound silly, but I heard the president yesterday or sometime on the news praising some pharmaceutical companies for how fast they turning medicine and supplies around. And one of the companies he mentioned was Teva. So if somebody could maybe mention to the president, Robert, you got a direct line with him, I think.
That's new to me.
But
You might have a friend who does, but.
I might, but
promotion.
if somebody would mention to the president, you know, we got a facility here that they could open back up wide open and put a lot of people to work and turn over some medicine real quick.
That's a good idea.
That is a good idea.
I have tried to bring that to Congressman Riggleman's attention.
Do what?
I brought that to Congressman Riggleman's attention. I have not heard from him yet on that.
I know someone's got the president's phone number, but
I think you do.
That's a good suggestion.
Speed dial.
I really think it's important that in light of the circumstances that we have, I plan a budget without a deficit.
I think there have been a couple comments. I'm just from, I don't have any free time right now at all with doing budget and then coronavirus related matters. But just trying to stay in touch with some of my colleagues as county administrators, and because we're all trying to figure out all this ourselves too. I think Mr. Scott made the comment, a couple other supervisors did too, is the consensus is that, you know, let's work on our budget based on what we know today, because everybody's working on their budget right now. You know, definitely be cautious in what we're doing, but the consensus is definitely that there's going to have to be some quarterly review, if not bi-monthly, as this thing transpires, so we know where we're going and where we're not going, and because we may very well be passing a budget in 60 days from now that we're going to have to completely retool sometime this summer. I mean, I hope we don't. I mean, if we do, hopefully we can do it in a positive way, not a negative way. But I think that's the consensus amongst my colleagues, that we're just going to have to revisit with our boards and be fluid over the next, as long as we have to, until we weather this storm.
Well, I think with everybody, I mean, there's nobody that doesn't know what's going on with this virus. I don't think anybody expects good economic conditions to come out of this. So, I mean, we're not in it by ourselves. Everybody knows that it's tough times, it's tough financial times. So if you make tough decisions, it's other companies or everybody else is having to do it.
Just one more thing. We want to keep our fund balances healthy. So there could be some things in here that maybe make the cut for today, but maybe don't need to be started until late in the year, until we know for sure. Because Ashley and I had this discussion that, yeah, we meet the minimum fund balance reserve requirements, But we both think that those are too low. And I would ask that you probably think that through, maybe not for tonight
What's the
or
minimum,
anything.
a 1 year?
Minimum requirement is 10% of budgeted expenditures.
For a year.
So currently, correct, and
that's
currently
11 million.
10% would get us about
11
1.5
million.
of expenditures,
Yeah.
assuming no influx of cash.
I think now would be the time to really make sure we're cautious about that we don't have to dip into it for something that we don't really need.
And Mr. Tuck, I appreciate that. Sheldon and I were talking about that this afternoon. I can't think of projects off the top of my head, but, we do have certain projects that are underway right now, and we certainly have enough work to keep us busy with things that are halfway through or whatever it might be. And so I think from Sheldon and I's conversation, we would be very pragmatic and cautious in terms of starting up new ones right away as soon as the budget's passed, because we got plenty of things that we're still have in the hopper. So I hear what you're saying, and honestly, that's kind of what we have to do anyways, just for workflow.
Do you have those fund balance numbers? What is that?
We probably want to update them, the fund balance. I mean, they're on the bottom of this
Last page,
capital improvement.
So
because it gives you an
this
idea.
is based off of where things were
I think it's like 17.
June 30th, 19. As far as money available for appropriation, it's about 19 million. That backs out anything that we have set aside for these various reserves that we have, the 10% that we're required to maintain, anything that we've anticipated spending in this year already that was included in the fiscal year 20 budget. But again, I do think we need to go back and look at it, but it should be, it's right in the 19 million range.
Yeah, it's in the final page here, but yeah, we need to, based on tonight's discussion and some other things, we need to look at that a little bit more. I mean, update them, essential.
So in light of that, I mean, we're projecting a pretty big cut in their fund balance over the next 5 years.
Well, that's,
Yeah. and
if you leave some of these things in there.
And the important thing to keep in mind is what's at the bottom of that sheet, that does not project or anticipate any growth in fund balance. Traditionally, we've had that in the past. Now
Well,
this
that's probably
year,
pretty
next
smart.
year, that could be different, but historically, we have had some growth. So if you look back at the general fund summary sheet, you'll see, like fiscal year 19, for example, we budgeted for and used 3.9 million in fund balance, but then we actually put 6.6 back into the fund balance, so that's kind of one of those shot in the dark in terms of your projections.
Mr. Chairman, a brief question.
Yes.
I realize we're talking about fiscal year 2021, but looking at 23, the joint facility, the fleet maintenance facility, $300,000, and then $6 million for 24, and hopefully things will be much improved by then, but is there truly a need for a new facility? I mean, how are they getting things done at this point? And again, I realize it's way out there, but it'll be here before we know it.
Sheldon, what do you do?
Yeah, so the school system is operating a very small bus garage. It's not large enough to basically put a full-size bus in and still be able to walk comfortably around it. It also doesn't have enough bus bays based upon the number of fleet in the system. So I think the need is definitely there to do something with the school system's bus garage.
$6 million.
And that's an estimated figure.
Well, I will throw out that I know in years past, haven't heard it discussed recently, but in years past, we had even discussed, this is before we were talking about combining, we had talked about privatizing. And just, like, instead of us doing it in-house, we, wouldn't accommodate buses, but all the other county-owned vehicles, you took it to, your local mechanic, then you're not paying VRS, you're not paying salaries and benefits, you're not paying for all the equipment, and And we were told, the analysis that was done then, and I don't know what it would look like today, but the analysis we were told then, we could potentially save about, I think it was about $250,000 annually. I would certainly be willing to entertain that. Now, again, that does not address I mean, this is back when Roger Cheek was still on the board, so it was a number of years ago.
For $6 million, we ought to be able to work on a NASA space machine. I would think they can make an improvement in a building for much less than that if they wanted to do it. I'm not disagreeing with you, John. There's something to be said, though, for having some permanent staff who are capable and able, on duties just to work on the county's equipment. But I think it's insane to spend $6 million on a building. There's got to be a way to get that down to about $1 million. I mean, you've got a huge monstrosity sitting in the Forest Business Park that didn't cost that much, that you could get 20 buses in.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
we also have discussed in the past body camp school gym over there, just sitting there. That's a huge building. That could be used as a bus garage, converted to a bus garage, has bathroom facilities, everything. You get quite a few buses in there. But we also threw out a month or so ago the possibility of maybe revamping that school. So we ought to use this for something. If we're not going to use it for a school, maybe consider it a bus garage. You got plenty of land over there and all that. But it's just sitting there deteriorating, and I've been bringing body camp up ever since I've been on the board, so that's 4 years, and so just sits there, nobody does anything with it. And we talk about it, but we don't do anything. But I'm sure I'm not an expert, but I'm sure for quite a bit less money, that gym could be converted into a bus garage real easy, or put it back into the school use.
And I'm certainly in favor of using what we have when we can, just because it'll save the taxpayers money. It's just a more efficient use of the resources.
Would there be
I don't know what the answer is right now, but I think everything needs to be on the table.
I'd just like to make one other suggestion, and I realize there's a lot of state mandates, but perhaps body camp could make something useful for the Department of Social Services.
I'd asked that earlier.
We'll discuss that 4 years from now.
What I've heard back in conversation with body camp is that the travel is the deterrent. On the bus garage, the location is the problem.
For the bus garage?
Yeah, that's what I just remember hearing that
Well, you can
somewhere.
drive out there in 12 minutes, and they got them parked all over the county. If that's a problem, maybe we'll go back to what Mr. Sharp said, farm it out.
Anyway. All right, anything else?
No, not of any substance or budget. The next, I'm not exactly sure why we skipped next Monday when we set up this calendar, but anyways, our next budget work session is scheduled for April 6th. So by then, we'll definitely present a balanced budget for you to review by then, and we'll tell you what those changes are, and if everybody nods their head, then we'll go on about our business. So that'll be the plan.
So we do not meet again until April 6th.
Apparently.
I think he knew the coronavirus was coming.
But that may be subject to change depending on what all might transpire. So be on the lookout.
Mr. Chairman, I have one final.
Well, we still have our regular meeting, but go ahead.
Just in light of, when we met with the school board, that gentleman stood up and said that for 10 years, the Big Island Elementary School HVAC system hadn't worked right. Anyway, I've spoken with a local contractor who I think is quite professional and can handle commercial. He said he'd be happy to look into it. Perhaps, I'd just like to suggest that if it's possible, if it's in line with our business, to suggest that perhaps someone local who has the expertise look at these county buildings, school buildings, HVAC systems, and see if we can't come up with something that might be more affordable for to upfit them?
I certainly entertain any second opinions.
If you'd like me to bring it forward further, I'll be glad to.
Well, what's the consensus of the board? I mean,
That's a school building? Do we have can we do that?
I don't see why we can't. We have the right to go inspect these buildings,
They're
don't
the
we?
ones spending the money.
We
But
can
have they-
suggest it.
We can suggest it, but didn't we tell them they had the $500,000 in CIP and they can spend it however they want it?
Right, but if they want, you know, I see a list of things more than what we've said they were gonna give them.
We absolutely have the authority to go and look at these buildings and make evaluations.
I'd say it's highly, I'm not saying it's not authorized or that you're not able to, but it's pretty highly unusual for us to go in with the school board to, well, pretty much do anything other than fund them.
Don't we have buildings and grounds?
Not for them.
Up for that.
County doesn't own the school property.
So it wouldn't be prudent for us to suggest this.
I don't think it'd be
I think we can
very well.
Suggesting a facilities analysis is fine, I'm just saying we don't have the authority to just go in and do
Right.
it. It's just-
I think we can request it
Yeah.
and see if they will accommodate it.
And in this time when the students are in the schools, that's what I'm suggesting, if we take a look at them and just see if what we find is in line with what's been suggested.
I think it's reasonable to make that request.
We can work that through the staff communication channels.
Okay.
So,
So we can't dictate it, but we can request access.
Well, we're gonna take a 5-minute break.
Yeah, I think we should probably take a quick 5-minute recess from the work session and then come back and wrap up our regular meeting.
You're so smart.
As you make your way
Think
to
we
the
can get there with 3
restrooms,
months
keep
freeze?
our
You
distances
think we can get there with 3 months freeze?
as a governor.
That means no one comes in the restroom with you.
So get moving.
What kind of positions are these?
Nobody's going to that.
We're gonna take a 5-minute recess, we'll be right back.
Just forward right here.
Anybody want some water?
Why do you want to be okay with college and stuff building off that might help with that? Several deputy positions, several fire and rescue positions, but they haven't had those filled for a while anyway, so because I haven't been able to fill them. Various different positions throughout the departments, but I would say the bulk of them are coming from public safety. But again, the positions that have been vacant for,
So we weren't spending it before.
we budget for it because they can budget, but we haven't had budget dollars there, but we haven't enough.
Okay.
So I think we can get there without huge pressure. Yeah.
We can do.
I just say that.
Thank you for saying that.
Ashley, thank you.
Came a long way.
Not only you did a great job, but your presentation was calming, like your demeanor is very calming. I don't know, when you get really bad news, the way it's presented can help you feel really stressed or really like, we can do this. And just you feel that.
Because I have to tell you, I talked to Susan the other day and I told her I thought maybe she had planned for retirement rather strategically, leaving with the budget like we have it and then the coronavirus coming on. I thought maybe she put that in place intentionally. She assures me she didn't, but I don't know. So.
Great.
Dinner and drinks on me.
I won't put up with that couch out there. We had our meeting the other day.
Love cocktail.
We're done. Dinner and drinks on me.
Go ahead, you do.
What you doing, getting my water?
Dinner and drinks. There you go.
Thank you, sir.
Cocktail back there, man.
Had one of them in a long time. We'll see how fast John can get us through this second part. My record is 16 minutes, I think.
You gonna get out of here?
I said my record's 16
I don't
minutes.
remember.
What'd you do with my cat?
Oh, okay, Don, you get you.
Oh, that's all right. I thought you put one over there.
Did Edgar share those cowbells with you guys?
No.
There's a box of them and they're on the table. Oh, you're brown.
Bunch of crap, ain't it?
Interesting.
Hey, I guess that's a Robert question. I don't know if I know when our next meeting, when we're gonna have that meeting about that wedding venue. I had a guy call me today and wanted to know if he was supposed to come tonight, and I told him no, it wasn't on the,
I guess that's April 13th, isn't it?
I don't know.
Let's see.
How would you know that?
Hmm?
How would you know that?
It's right here on the board calendar. No. No, their work session, so it'll be the April the 20th, I guess.
How's the gun business, Tommy?
Daughters.
I was getting all kind of phone calls,
He's got to be trust signs, isn't it?
everything. As far as ammo, you can't get any ammo. It's gone. 9mm and 5.56 for ARs. Oh, damn, I take that back. Somebody was telling me today they went on a site somewhere and they found 5.56 for ARs, $1 a piece. 1,000 rounds a few weeks ago was $300. Now, $1,000.
What's true? More than true.
You guys talking about gun sales?
Hmm?
Yeah, it's like the biggest gun sale Richmond has ever seen.
Everybody's getting ready for when the food supply cuts off.
All right, let's go.
I know.
I've been looking at this great big nice bowl up there on Eggers Farm. I've been talking to a guy I know that works for Lowe's. He's got one of them boom trucks that just reach right over the fence. and grab it.
Just pick it up and take it.
That's probably the one, that's my brother's that he bought from Bob that's laying lame out in the field. You can probably put him in a can. You take him over to the canner and you'll.
Terry called me today. Of course, you know what he was talking about, but anyway. He said, I got plenty of food. And I said, hey, Kerry. He said, I got cows in the field. I said, Kerry, I expect there's more people than you that knows that it's cows in your field.
That's right.
Are you picking up everything?
Car?
Yeah.
We had it cleaned and the glue underneath of it disintegrated and caused two big ripples on it. So we had to have it.
Everybody reads a minute.
Together. It's been like that for.
Who's our official minute reader?
Yeah, the
To
glue
make
under
sure
it
it's right.
holds it down, it's just nothing left of it. It's like ocean in here after they clean it off and whatnot.
All right, guys.
Without throwing it over.
Where's everyone?
Call him back in. Call him
Hey,
back in.
John,
Yeah.
remember my record's 16 minutes. Can you beat it?
Doesn't look like it. That's because we haven't started yet.
Well, I mean, 16 minutes from when we start.
Depends on if we do a closed session.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Do we? No, that's right. Hey,
Huh?
I said, "Daggone it, I forgot about that.
I did too.
It's just so hard.
Is it closed?
All right.
session time?
Bob,
Sue?
Bob and Mickey?
I think so.
About the jet fuel tanker.
And, reconvene the Board of Supervisors for our regular meeting that, it turns out, it's starting after 7 instead of before. But that's a good, productive work session. Well, since we don't really have anybody here to ask them to silence their cell phones, I guess we'll move on to the moment of silence. And if you'll stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, first we have the approval of the agenda. Mr. Hiss, do we have any changes?
No, the only thing that I'll add is just under my report, I'll ask myself and Chief Jack Jones, we're going to give a little bit of an update on our coronavirus response and answer any questions about that. So that's just what I plan to cover in my report.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I move for the approval agenda.
All right, you've heard the motion from Mr. Tuck to approve the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carried. Next, we have the citizen comment period. I don't see anyone. I don't have anyone signed up to speak. I'm not sure if we have anyone.
I wasn't sent a single comment.
What? I'm sorry.
I didn't receive anything in the mail.
Okay. All right, so no comments in the mail. So I'm going to close that, move on to the consent agenda, and Mr. Hiss.
Okay, the consent agenda has two items. Number one, consideration of a resolution accepting and appropriating the 2019 State Homeland Security Program Special Operations Team Swiftwater Grant. And then the second item is consideration of a resolution authorizing the submission, acceptance, and appropriation of a 2020 VITA, Virginia Information Technology Authority, Text to 911 grant. Which that's a good program. That's a grant to help us change over our systems to allow us to receive text to the 911 instead of just phone calls.
All right. I'll entertain a motion.
So
Mr.
moved.
Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as read.
All right, you've heard the motion. Mrs. Parker, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Next, we have the approval of the minutes for December 23rd, 2019.
I didn't hear anything from Andy, so I think okay.
I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
All right, for a motion for Mr. Scott to approve the minutes from December 23rd, 2019. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstain.
One abstention. Next, the approval of the minutes from January 13th, 2020.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the minutes from the January 13th, 2020 meeting.
You've heard the motion from Mr. Tuck to adopt the minutes from January 13th, 2020. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Next, we have the proclamation in recognition of National Crime Victims' Rights Week, April 19th through April 25th, 2020.
We asked them to not come, so they don't want to be too full. So they
Okay, so, for the benefit of the audience, we asked them not to come because of the coronavirus. So we have signed this document, and, well, I have, and we'll be getting that to them tomorrow. But just know it's been taken care of. But do I still need a motion for this from the board? I think officially, that's probably the safest thing.
You don't need a motion.
For a proclamation? Okay. All right, then next we have action items. This is consideration of a resolution authorizing contracts and related work for solid waste transfer and disposal improvements. This is resolution R032320-03. Staff presentation by Public Works Director Sheldon Cash.
All right. We have a different setup tonight. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So in March and April of 2019, we met with the board and talked about the need to alter the way that we dispose of solid waste in Bedford County. Since these meetings that we had about a year ago, we've been essentially having nearly a monthly meeting to update the board as to solid waste and where we're at. We also met with Draper Aiden Associates. We've also had our division manager, Mike Dorsey, with us. Due to the coronavirus, they're not with me tonight, but I'll try my best to answer any questions the board may have about where we're at with our various solid waste projects. So back in December, the board authorized us to issue an invitation to bid for repurposing our existing transfer station out of solid waste, and they also authorized some disposal contracts with some private landfills. At that time, we got Draper Aiden and Reynolds Architects to look at our transfer station and do the design process. That was all completed back in January of this year. We put the project out to bid. We received 2 bids for the modification of our actual transfer station. So what I'll do is I'll draw the board's attention to the packet that you've got. There should be a table that's part of your packet. So there's multiple items that's involved with the transfer station project. So I'll draw your attention to the middle of the page where it says $590,000 for the renovation of the building. That's where we would modify the building. Does everybody have the table? It's a one-page table that sums up to 2.2. Okay, so in the middle of that page, it's $590,000 for the building modification. So we could receive 2 bids for the building mods. Low bid was Price Buildings. That should sound familiar to the board. That's also the contractor who did our old nursing home renovation, and it's also the contractor who's doing our new London Shell building. So we've had good results with Price Buildings, so we feel comfortable about Price Buildings' price that they gave us of $590,000. The next low bid was $855,000. So Price Buildings was significantly lower than the next low bid for that project. So if you look through the table there, you'll see that the various different items that kind of sum up to the $2.2 million, including nearly a $300,000 contingency for the project. There are some site improvements, things like gravel and stone grading. There's also a lot of costs in there for equipment. So if you look kind of in the third section of that chart, you'll see that we're looking at purchasing a new rubber tire loader to back up the one that we have currently in service, a new excavator, some equipment scales to weigh everything so we make sure that we get a good net tons in our trailers that are outbound, a tarping platform so that we can make sure that all of our waste is secure when it leaves the facility. We don't want to have litter on county roads. And then also a yard truck that we can use to move our trailers around the facility. So I'll point out that when we first started talking to the board about a year ago, we were estimating probably about a $3 million project for this. So all in, it looks like we're going to be in the 2.2 to 2.5 range at this point, so much lower than the original $3 million that we had anticipated. So there is an item on here that I wanted to bring the board's specific attention to. It's actually in the memo. So if you flip back to the memo, we're talking about a $20,000 deduction. So this is an area, so $590,000 was our low bid. Price Buildings is offering us a $20,000 credit if we close the transfer station and let them have the building entirely. So what does that mean? So that means that our citizens who visit our facility would no longer have a concrete pad and unloading waste underneath a covered building. They would most likely be going to our landfill facility itself. They would be driving through more dusty roads. They would be seeing mud, that type of thing. So I just wanted to draw the board's attention to that. There's a $20,000 potential savings that we could see, reducing the $590 down to $570. However, it would be a service level reduction for the citizens of the county.
What's
So-
the staff recommendation?
Either way, we can make it work either way. If the board would like to see the $20,000 reduction, we can make it happen. But again, it is a service level reduction. It's something that our citizens are used to. They're used to unloading waste on a concrete floor under a covered building. So the contractor obviously would rather have the whole building all at one time. The way that we would do it if we don't take the $20,000 credit is we would operate the building in half. So we would operate 2 bays for drop-offs of waste, and then the other 2 bays would be under construction. So we would give the contractor 2 bays, and we keep the other 2 bays in service. But that does come at a cost of $20,000. So we don't have necessarily strong feelings one way or the other on the $20,000. But keep in mind, it is a service level reduction, and there could be complaints if we were to shut the building down totally.
That service level reduction would be temporary.
Temporary.
For how long?
7 months.
It's a 7-month construction project. It may not shut down immediately while we're doing paperwork initially for the first month or so. But I would envision it probably wouldn't be at least, probably at least 6 months if I had to guess at this point.
Well, just us be mud when it rains.
Yeah. So it would basically be, you'd be driving into our landfill itself instead of using a building would be the difference.
Any liability associated with that?
It's typical. Most landfills don't have a transfer station like we would have. So if you go to other landfills, a lot of the waste citizens would have to drive directly into the landfill anyway.
That's what we used to do.
Yeah, back in the day, yeah. Mr. Supervisor Tuck can probably remember the county's closed landfill back in the our 80s, early 90s. The citizens had to drive into the solid waste itself.
If the roads were in poor condition, get back there, would we have to spend money on gravel and stuff?
So we spend money on gravel anyway to keep our roads maintained. We would probably need to up that a little bit, have a little bit better quality. Right now, it's just larger trucks that go in and out of our landfill, so it's a little more forgiving. They have a higher height clearance over top of rutted out roads and that type of thing. So we would have to spend a little bit more money trying to maintain those roads so that our citizens would have good access.
Or just a little bit more money.
Well, it depends. It's all weather related, to be honest with you, Supervisor Scott. It depends on when we get a lot of rain, we spend a lot of money on gravel and stone trying to maintain landfill roads. When we have a period of dry weather, we don't spend as much on our landfill roads. So I will point out, even if we do decide to not take the $20,000 credit, if we decide to go ahead and pay the $590, at some point toward the tail end of the project, at the last month or so, we probably would have to anyway send our citizens to the landfill directly because the transfer station would be in a final state or somewhat final state, and we wouldn't be quite ready for the transfer trailer operation yet. So there would be a period of time, one way or the other, for probably a month or so that we would have to send folks to our landfill. So that's kind of the discussion point.
Yes, Mr. Scott.
Wow, a few minutes ago, I was talking about everybody need to tighten the belts, and I think everybody needs to tighten the belts, and I'm for saving $20,000.
Where's the rest of the board?
I'm in agreement with Mr. Scott.
Nikki?
It's really probably going to be more like 5 months
5 months
of them having to go back to the back, maybe.
probably, yeah.
Not a full, it won't be a full 7.
I don't see it being the full 7 months because there's some mobilization, the initial bonds and paperwork and stuff like that that we'd be working on for the first month or so.
It'll make it fun for them. Let's send them back there.
All right. All right, so we'll look at the
Well,
570.
I mean, well, it's, you know.
I'm not a huge fan of it, but that's what, you guys think that's the best option?
Yeah, I mean,
It's really cutting services a lot. I mean, we are spoiled, you're right. We do have a nice transfer station. But for 5 months, I guess.
Tammy,
I'm okay with
for cutting it, saving the 20?
saving the 20,000.
All right, I think that's a consensus.
And I will add that it is a good 5 months for to send landfill vehicles. Weather-wise, typically, that's not in this time of year, spring time frame when we have a lot of wet weather, it's not ideal. But since construction would be over the summer months, it is kind of a better period of time. Typically, never know what Mother Nature will throw at us, but typically it is a better time.
Yeah, I remember one year where it didn't stop raining for 5 months, it seemed like.
Yeah, hopefully we won't.
How does Helen feel about that?
About Yeah, our scale house attendant, of course, that weighs our trucks in and out would have to be the one who relays the message to our drivers, all of our residents, that they'll need to go to the landfill directly. So there could be some complaints there. I just want to make sure that the board's aware of that. So we will be, we'll try our best to make sure that we provide the best service that we possibly can, but it will be a reduction than what we're used to right now. Temporary reduction.
I'll just tell it's all y'all's fault.
So the landfill's in Charlotte's district.
That's right.
And I said no.
So I will say as well too, with the coronavirus, I don't know what the impacts will be to the construction industry, what the impacts will be for ordering heavy equipment, for ordering steel. So I am somewhat concerned. That's why time is of the essence to try to get this approved and get these orders in the queue so that manufacturers can start to address our needs here. I don't know what those timelines are going to look like at this point. It kind of changes by the day. So with that being said, I'd be glad to answer any questions the board may have about the transfer station project. We tried to include everything in one spreadsheet, one table, one resolution, rather than coming back to the board with multiple different pieces of this. We tried to incorporate everything in one.
All right, any other questions for staff? Okay, thank you.
Do we need to pass? Do we need to vote on it?
Well, we're gonna need, we'll open it up to the board for discussion and possible action. This one's not a public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve resolution R03232003.
All right, you've heard the motion from Mrs. Bansley. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried unanimously. All right, next we have board committee reports, which we have none.
Yeah, I think we cover those during the board work session.
Board comments?
How about B? Are you going to do B?
I would just like to comment something, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
That Liberty University is streaming this for us for free for the next couple months during this COVID-19, and I just want to say a huge thank you and shout out to Liberty for doing that for us.
Yeah, I would agree with it. And thank you for being here, sir. I know this isn't what you would prefer to do tonight, so thank you.
Number B, where it says consideration resolution ratifying declaration of local emergency.
I don't have that one in this packet in my
It's on a computer.
My computer died during this meeting. I was afraid that might happen. If somebody has something for an item 9B.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe there was confusion in different versions of the agenda, but anyways, I think we sent this out, I know we sent this out on Friday as an addition to the agenda. So item 9B is a consideration of a resolution to ratify the declaration of local emergency in Bedford County. Anyways, it's what we sent out. It's the exact same resolution that that Mr. Sharp signed last week, and we just felt that it was appropriate for Mr. Sharp to go ahead and do that with the thought that we would ratify it officially at the next board meeting.
Okay. Oh, yeah, the one.
Yeah. I'm sorry about that if there was some confusion with that. But.
All right. Did everyone get an opportunity to see that? And I appreciate Jack Jones putting together that description that's available on the website to sum it up for citizens, because I had a number of questions about, and what all does this mean, and put it in layman terms so that the public can understand what it means when we do that. And so I think you did a really good job of summing that up so that people can understand it. Do we need any action from the board?
Yeah, it would just be approval of the resolution R03-2320-04, the declaration of emergency.
All right, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
All right, you've heard the motion from Mr. Scott. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
While we're on that subject, I have a question. I'm not trying to make it harder on the staff or anything. When y'all consider taking over streaming for the board, is it a way that the board could like in situations like what's going on now, get text messages rather than emails? Like, could it be a group text message set up? The reason I'm saying that, sometimes I don't get to my email for like a day or maybe that night or something. And I had people call me and ask me about this. I didn't know anything about it. I was saying, I'm not sure what you're asking me. And then I had to go find out before so that's the reason.
Emails on our phone, that would help.
I get my emails on my phone, but
Yeah, I get my emails on my phone.
you just have to set it up. But because it's my own phone, it's not a.
And I'm not trying to cause more work. It's just,
appreciate it.
if that's a simple thing, okay. If it's
I would
not,
request that you do both if you do that, because I would rather have the email than I would the text.
Well, I will caution, I love the text. However, with FOIA, you send out a text, now I've got to keep that text.
same thing applies with your
Right,
email.
and so I would rather not have to keep a text if my phone dies or something like that, and that's happened before, then I don't have that record anymore. And so that's why I always ask everyone to use county email, because then the onus is on the county to have that record and be able to search that and find that for FOIA. So in order to remain compliant, I'd prefer myself, speaking just for myself, I'd prefer just to have my correspondence through county email
It's
or a phone
not,
call.
it's not a big deal. I didn't mean to cause extra work or anything, but
No, I understand as far as the timeliness of things.
I do think that we should expedite looking into us being able to stream our own meetings.
I agree, and until the whole coronavirus, well, this is coming as a good and a bad time. So Ms. Kaufman and Bridget were looking at that anyways as part of our new agenda management system that we've been wanting to do. So it's good that we're already working on it. It's bad now that we're having to spend all this time on the coronavirus, but this is kind of expediting the need to go ahead and do this. Again, of course, Liberty University is very, very gracious to help us out for a couple months, but if we want to continue doing that, we'll need to come up with another solution. And to your text, I mean, maybe if there's something, especially if I'm sending it out late in the week or something that needs, I guess it's hard for me to know what's urgent that you may or may not look at versus what might be routine emails that you may review. But I can try to send out a text and just say, hey, I sent you an email about such and such. You may want to take a look at it. And that may just limit it to that. Instead of actually explaining what it is in the text, I can just point to an email and say, hey.
I would make it a high priority.
It'd be worth your while to check this out when you get a chance.
No
We'll try
high
to do that.
priority. I just didn't know how hard it was or simple or what.
Any other board comments?
Was that the comment here?
Yeah.
I would like to hear, I've heard a lot from people in the citizens about things that churches are doing, and Mr. Hess, you've done some work that I've heard bringing churches together to help during this COVID-19. I would like to hear a report of some of those things. Pretty exciting. I love it when I get a positive phone call, people saying the county's doing great things, so I'd just like to hear more about it.
All right. And I'll help Chief Jones help me out with this as best I can. So, I don't want to rehash everything you already know, but, number one is, well, not number one, I'm trying to figure out where to start, to be honest with you. There's a lot of things in motion. I mean, I think one of the big challenges and frustrations with all of this is that seems like every 48, 72 hours, there's a new directive or declaration or whatever it might be. So you're planning along, trying to anticipate what might be happening, and then within 48, 72 hours, the goalposts are moved again somewhere else, and we have to plan for that also. So that's, in the meantime, we got to keep on regular county business going as well. So that's a challenge. That's a challenge everybody's facing, quite frankly. I mean, it's just the nature of this beast that we're all trying to tackle. So, to Ms. Bansley, one of your points is one of the thoughts that we've had is, and again, trying to anticipate needs, is if you think about your typical disaster situation, if we have a big ice storm or whatever it might be, always the guidance is to try to shelter in place and be prepared for 3 to 4 days worth of, hardship, and may not be convenient and so forth. So, and I think citizens, and especially, a fairly resilient community like Bedford County, people understand what that is, and luckily we have a good population that's able to prepare for that for the most part. But we do have segments of our community who have challenges in that area. And particularly as this crisis continues on, we're starting to get into another, now we have kids home the entire time, or with no school, we're going to have, businesses are shutting down, paychecks are starting to dwindle, especially when you get into your shut-in and elderly population, they're not able to get out as much as they wanted to, first of all, because this virus disproportionately affects people of that generation, but also, so it's a safety issue, number one. And then number two, the unique thing about this virus and this crisis is you don't want to have hundreds and hundreds of people running around doing things all the time, because you're just potentially spreading the public health issue. So I know that the sheriff's office, in conjunction with the chief, and I know they've convened some groups with a variety of churches. I wasn't in that meeting, unfortunately. I'm probably working on budget. Anyways, the concept is to try to start preparing for that. Is that you have to think that if this doesn't go on for 3, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it is, some of our vulnerable citizens are really going to start to struggle in a lot of ways. And I think the school system is doing a great job in terms of, I think the video we put out over the weekend explaining the state of emergency, the school system in just a couple weeks has really transitioned from an educational organization to a food service organization, which is really pretty remarkable if you think about it, to transition their whole mission right now to that. And that's what we're going to have to do, I think, in order as a community to help support our vulnerable populations and those who are starting to experience their own personal crisis at home, whether it's with food insecurity, medicines, other types of challenges that might start to come up. So the thought is that we need to start formulating a volunteerism network, and what better source to do that. We have all sorts of great nonprofits in our community, but what better source to do that than our faith community? And we have so many strong places of worship and churches in this organization that contribute greatly and mightily to our families and community already, then who better to tap into those resources and get those organized? So I know the sheriff and chief have been in those conversations. Do you have anything else to add to that? Basically, the plans are still underway, so I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So
there's a lot going on with training our uniformed career and volunteer folks, law enforcement, coordinating with the health departments, state emergency management. There's a lot of pieces to this. But there's one component, because the at-risk populations are very susceptible to this illness. And the other great thing is that a lot of our people of age are rule followers. So if the government agency says stay at home, they're going to stay at home. They're not going to go get groceries. They're not going to pick up medications and things. So we've kind of been very sensitive to that. This concept is reaching out to some of the larger churches in the community to work in specific areas, and then they be the outreach, the tentacles to all of the other churches to get as many parties involved as we can, so that we're not doing it, right? We're supporting and encouraging the community of faith to be able to do that, and then we do what government should do. The things we have to do are the things that we're really good at, but not all of the other pieces. And an example is if these bodies, if they're fully functional and they run into shortages of equipment and resources, we can request that through state emergency management through our process. We can request those things and we'll to get any services we need. Sheriff and I have met with the retail community today to provide any services we can, security and training, and to get an assurance from them about a commitment to the community and our folks. And we've got a meeting with the pharmacy community and a few other people. But training our law enforcement, our fire and rescue people, coordinating with the health systems and the doctor's offices. There's been quite a few pieces that we've been fortunate to work on. But There's some really great groups out here that are ready to be engaged, but what they need is a mission, right? Someone needs to award them a task. And even our cooperative extension folks are writing public service announcement on health and nutrition in crisis, activities for families to do, because that's a real concern. As pressure builds at home, and everyone's home, you know, there are going to be difficulties within the home that we're trying to put off as long as we can. This isn't going to be a short event. The numbers went up 44% in a 24-hour period in the Commonwealth. So this is not like it's going to end really immediately, and it's new. This is all new. We've been through H1N1, bird flu, a lot of other things. Nothing exactly like this.
Well, thank you for all that you're doing.
Yeah, we've got a lot of great people out there.
For good reports. Very thankful. Makes me proud to live in Bedford County.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, next we have board appointments. Looks like we have two of them. One is an appointment for Amanda Kaufman to the Lynchburg Juvenile Detention Center Board.
I'll make a motion to appoint Deputy County Administrator Amanda Kaufman to the county representative to the Lynchburg Juvenile Detention Center Board.
All right, you've heard the motion from Mrs. Parker. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried unanimously. And then the Community Policy and Management Team.
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion to appoint Kelly D. Jennings to the Community Policy Management Team as the Director of Special Services for Bedford County Public Schools.
All right, you've heard the motion from Mr. Tuck. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Next, we have the County Attorney Report.
Mr. Chairman, can we flip-flop the county administrator and county attorney report real quick, just so I can cover a couple items before we go into a closed session while we have the streaming service still going on? Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Again, just about the coronavirus matter and the crisis that we're dealing with. Of course, we've declared that state of emergency. We've tried to educate the citizens as to what that actually means, because it's not I was doing an newspaper interview today. I mean, it's not your normal state of emergency. And a lot of times it's weather related, hurricane, flood, tornado. This is not that at all. It's still a lot of the same premise and the same process, but it's a whole different ball of wax that we're dealing with here. Couple of these items, I mean, made this for public consumption also, is of course we've closed essentially all of our facilities to foot traffic to the public. So, the purpose of doing that is to keep keep interactions, at a minimal, so we're not contributing to the spread of this virus. And also, the board members know this. I mean, if we have one person get sick in one of our offices, then likely that entire staff has to be quarantined. And then we have an entire function shut down for a couple weeks. And that's quite a risk to take as we move forward. So anyways, we've tried to put as much out there as we can, publicity, and we'll continue to do that. But essentially, we just have to urge our citizens we have other methodologies to conduct their business. It's not super convenient all the time, but we're going to try our best to make it that way. All staff will be ready to answer phones and walk them through the processes. We have different drop boxes at different facilities in order to allow people to drop off their forms if they still want to do that in person. We have internet capability, if people have internet capability, to process most of your business with the county via our webpage. And of course, we want people to utilize that as well. So we know that's a hardship on some folks who it's easier to do the stuff in person, but as of right now, and of course we'll just evaluate it, and as this virus crisis seems to subside, of course we're going to open up our facilities as soon as we can in order to do that. Along those lines, one thing that has come up, and not quite, and I'm just open for any type of feedback, because this is one of these situations where, so people are at home, kids are at home, spring has sprung, weather is nice, and you want to go outside and do things. So, and that's good. And of course, during this whole virus situation, getting some fresh air and doing things outside is important. But the flip side of that is that our parks have become extremely popular, which is good. I mean, it's good that we have these public facilities that people can utilize for our parks. But at the same time, you've seen probably footage in some of the news and so forth of, people on the beaches with thousands of people up and down the beaches. And I'm not saying we have thousands of people, but we have similar circumstances going on where you have, your friends of 30 and 40 in groups of, big groups, of 30 or 40 of your best friends hanging out at a park. So it's one of those things where our parks are very popular right now, and by the time you have dozens and dozens and dozens of people out there, again, it's good to be outside and doing things, but it's also certainly not consistent with the social distancing and trying to prevent the spread of this virus. So it's one of those double-edged swords where it's a no-win situation. We're not there quite yet, but I mean, I'd be happy for any feedback. I mean, especially if the governor orders any outside recreation areas to shut down, then of course we would comply with that. That hasn't happened yet, but that is something that is concerning to us, is that we're sitting out here pumping out all sorts of information to try to stay healthy and social distance, but at the same time we have people using parks. And I don't want to discourage people from using our parks, but if they do use our parks, I want them to utilize it in a smart way and not convene in groups of 20 and 30 in order to do things.
How do we get them, because the trails are great for them to be on, because they don't congregate on the trails in the woods, on the bike paths and the jogging paths. It's under those pavilions is where you say group 30, 40, and that's, you're being very conservative.
Right.
Very conservative.
Can we just, put like construction tape around the?
Yeah, I think they'll still congregate right outside of that because of the way it lends itself to be a great meeting place. It's the park itself is great, and it's not the problem. It's the centerpiece of the parks at Fallen Creek and different places that we just keep them out of there, because I'd hate to see the trails themselves, because they're out there. You'll see people on the trail, but they're not. Rarely you see two of one.
Right. I mean, it's a linear thing. It's not
That's
a
right.
congregation thing.
Right.
So.
I was at the D-Day on Sunday, I believe this was yesterday, and I didn't see any big groups. It was just families, and we all kept our distance from each other. And
Anyway, it is a concern that we have out there, and I'm not. I mean,
it's an age group too. It's probably 14 to 17. I'm going to say 14 to 20.
I mean, our skate park is definitely not being utilized in consistent with social distancing. that is definitely being heavily utilized.
For the intent that it was built.
Right.
Close that one.
Yeah.
Close that one.
Good. And we've thought about that. About there are areas that we can, and we might.
Because
I could do that.
if they pick up something there and they take it to their house.
I could see closing the skate park because it's a one thing. I mean, that's just one small area. It's not like you're closing 20 acres of trails.
Right.
I don't understand why, if everybody needs to go home, stay in their houses, why you have the park open.
Well,
I mean,
that's a good question.
One person's contaminated and he's in the park and he gives it to somebody else.
Because
they
you keep your distance, you have to have your family there, right?
Yeah,
You keep
and
your
plus
distance
if
from
you're on
other
the
family.
trail, you're
But
not
you still,
in a big group.
the germs are there and somebody's gonna get it and take it home and eventually it just spreads out. I mean, if we're gonna tackle this thing and do what we're doing in this building and homes and businesses and stuff, then you open the park up and say, go out there and do your
But our
thing.
parks aren't a problem. It's the one area of the park. I mean, the trails are not a problem.
Because you have the wind blowing, you're distant from other people. I don't know.
Anything's a problem if somebody's contaminated, they're out there contaminating something they touched, and they touched this and they touched that. The way I read it, the virus can survive 12 to 24 hours on a surface that somebody touched or sneezed on or coughed on. But I'm not going to the park. I'll leave it up to you. It's in your district.
Anyway, I'm not necessarily solving this tonight. I just want to let you know that we may come to a point where we do have to either close down parks or close down specific ones.
Is the law,
And-
are police officers riding about the parks and trying to disperse the
Well,
groups?
we had to do that on Saturday.
Yeah.
There was a couple gatherings of some individuals that were fairly large, and the sheriff's office did go by and kind of, in a very polite way, nudged them and said, this isn't a good idea for all these reasons, and they seemed to understand and dispersed. So,
It's right across the street, it'd be easy, it seems like.
yeah.
That one, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's easy. It may not be so easy in Monita, so to speak, or something like that, which is being heavily utilized also. So, yeah. So anyways, that's been a decision. We've been knocking around the idea in our office as to, do we close or do we keep them open? I mean, I've been erring on the side of wanting to keep them open until we're told not to. But at the same time, like Mr. Scott said, I mean, there's certainly public health information out there that would lend yourself to want to lean that direction. So it's not there's no easy answer to this.
I think you should keep checking on it, and if you see it becoming a problem, then deal with it.
Or how about something like no one under 18 unless you're with an adult or with a family, or, it's just the young kids, right, that are all.
It's, when you say it's 14 to 20, and that kind of
You talk to Wyatt more than I do.
How would you enforce something?
Yeah, I guess I would probably feel more comfortable with maybe some temporary signage or something that just says,
No groups more than
yeah,
10
That's
like,
what we're-
limit your group size to, no.
Well, in fact, that's what the meeting before this meeting, myself and the sheriff and chief and Amanda, we were talking, and that's kind of where we landed, actually, was the town has a sign shop, and they can make signs for us, and we'd pay if they wanted us to, but to do that type of signage and put it up at the entrance to the parking
Yeah, I just,
area.
I just hate the heavy-handed approach if we can avoid it, so
They're gonna find something to do with their time somewhere else if they can't go to the park.
Well, and we talked
And
about
it
that
could
too.
be a lot more dangerous.
yeah.
Yeah, Mr. David, yeah, we talked about that too, and yeah, it's better to have that activity out in the public and in the open.
All right.
Are you done?
Yeah, I mean, the final thing I would say regarding the coronavirus, I mean, if you all hear things from your constituents or if you have questions, please feel free to pass them on to our staff. You guys are out there listening to people and hear stuff, and perhaps likely hear it before we do.
Well, I guess most of us got that email about the libraries, didn't we?
Yeah.
No, about asking us to shut them down completely.
I forwarded that to you.
Yeah, and we forwarded on to Miss Jenny at the library and the library board, and I haven't heard anything with all that. Have you?
Yeah,
Have you heard anything?
yes.
Oh,
I
what?
can give an update on what the library's doing.
Anything different than what they are doing?
With the, right now they're doing the curbside service, are they changing that?
No, they're doing the curbside service. They've also have expanded online services available. And then in addition, are allowing public to use Wi-Fi in their parking lots if they're adhering to social distancing. So everything's being sanitized when it comes in and goes out for curbside per the CDC guidelines at all 6 facilities.
I got 2 quick questions.
But that's all I have about coronavirus. It's going to continue to evolve. We'll continue to try to push as much information as we can to you as the board members. And
I understand. Yes.
Real quick, before we go and close that, I forwarded that email today about broadband, and they're basically asking us to sign off with, I guess, a letterhead where each one of them can carry it with them. So if they get stopped, which I don't think anybody's stopping anybody out on the road, but I don't want them to use that as an excuse not to continue their work, because they seem to be moving pretty quick right now. So I don't know if we want to do that or not.
yeah, I planned on doing that, but I mean, it's great that the board, I figured the board would be, so what this is about is, I think the governor's guidance Blue Ridge Towers fits within the category of allowing to continue to do business from the way I understand from governor's
It
guidance.
does.
And, you know, the way I talked to Mr. Smith, Anthony Smith, about this on Friday, thinking that this might happen. And, you know, the way I look at it is Blue Ridge Towers is providing a critical infrastructure, no different than what Water Authority or Comcast or Verizon does. So I figured if they're allowed to stay in business and go out there and continue to work, then I figure Blue Ridge Towers, I think the citizens, when we'd be appropriate to allow that construction of that critical infrastructure to continue.
Yeah, and we have citizens waiting for that. I mean,
Yeah.
in light of the school situation, the sooner we get this done, the better.
That's right.
One more real quick question, that the wedding venue we were going here and we postponed, do you have a date on that?
I know what we suggested originally was waiting till the May.
That's
for the
fine. Only
board
reason I'm
meeting.
asking that question because somebody called me today.
Yeah.
One of the people up there wanted to know the date. And I didn't think it had been scheduled. I hope I was telling him right.
You were tentatively, just kind of in-house, of course now it's going to be public, but tentatively, if all the guidelines, I mean, what we explained to the applicant and what we were looking at was our board meeting the day after Memorial Day, whatever day that is, but late May is what we had tentatively penciled that in for.
Okay, that's all.
But that's very tentative at this point because we have no idea where we're going to be.
Right. And the applicant was gracious in terms of extending it. They're not going to open, even if this thing is approved with construction, it's not going to be open until next wedding season, essentially anyways. So.
That's all for me.
All right. Anything else?
I'd just like to ask, I'm getting a lot of calls about complaining about Comcast, and I've left messages with Comcast about Comcast has promised coverage in areas of District 1 based on a grant that they received thanks to Kathy Byron, Delegate Byron. And they promised it, and they told the people they're getting it, and then they come through and said, oh no, you're too far off the road this way, or for whatever reason, it seems to be a lot that are not getting it. And I don't know, do we have any leverage with it? Is there anything we can do about it?
I would think that would be something, especially if the Tobacco Commission was involved in that. That would be something to bring to Kathy's attention. Because if Comcast is not living up to
Aren't you
what
experiencing a little bit of that?
what
I
they
am, but-
said they were going to do, and I can't speak to it, but if they are, then I'm confident Kathy would be very interested in that.
I'm getting similar things, but Comcast did not promise specific addresses in that grant. You ain't got nothing to stand on with them.
Yeah, the folks
But
on
you
Carroll
can take a
Road are good
swing at it.
Example where they said they were told, the folks on Carroll Road said
They were told by
Right, they made
subcontractors
it
who
up
were
with
out
Thompson.
there.
I don't know.
I didn't doubt all this.
Oh.
Subcontractors told them, they thought the addresses were there.
And
No
on
one from
broadband, I'm glad
Comcast.
to hear that you say that it's moving along fast. Now, what about the rescue squad over at Saunders behind there? I was just looking for where they're gonna put a tower. I don't see where anything's going on.
That's a Verizon tower.
Yeah, that's.
I don't see where anything's going on.
Yeah.
How about Hannibas, is that one?
That's one that's still, that's the last one that goes up.
I haven't seen any work there.
And there's a reason for that. I mean, we're still having to go through an administrative review process. There's a waiting period. I think that expires this week. They'll drop the building permit, I think, by the end of this week. Blue Ridge Towers will, and they'll be on about their business, working on that here pretty soon. But that'll be one of the last ones that goes up. But yes, they are making great progress lately, and last month, and, talking with them, it's in their best business interest to get this thing up and running too, so.
All right, I guess we still have the closed session.
Yes, sir.
Patrick coming in, are we moving on?
I mean, I guess I can read it. I'll need somebody to make a motion, and then I'll,
Mr. Chair, I'm going to leave before the closed session because it looks like on the agenda it says it's about New London Airport, and because that has to do with Liberty University, and I work for Liberty University, I think I need to leave before that closed session,
okay.
according to the law of my.
All right, do we have anything else other than the closed session? No, okay. All right, I'll entertain a motion to go into the closed session
Looks like we have Patrick here to read it.
Yeah, pursuant to section 2.2-3711A7 regarding actual litigation pertaining to the New London Airport.
So moved.
All right, you've heard the motion from Mr. Tuck. All those in favor say aye. Oh, okay.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Tuck?
Yes.
Ms. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes.
We are on closed session.
Do we stay here or go back there?
We're gonna have to